We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H, and this week I'm here with...
Lee Overstreet, a little more than pinch hitter lately on AV Rant. It's getting a little bit regular. I don't know what to think about that.
Well, yeah, I will certainly give folks the update. Tom Andre is the regular host of this podcast. Big thanks to Lee Overstreet for having filled in last week and again this week. So yes, you're right. It's a little bit more than pinch hitting. But yes, Tom, to let everybody know, again, health-wise, everything is okay. So that is not the issue. It is all house renovation related stuff. It seems as though the more that is opened up, the more that is discovered, which requires more opening up. So,
see, he should have known when he lived on Pandora's Box Lane that something would come up like this one day. I feel terrible for him. It's so stressful. I've got some car stuff and some house stuff going on right now. And I remember when we moved into our house, we had a big plumbing issue and that kind of stuff. It just grates on your nerves. And then in the middle of this situation that we're in, oh,
yeah. So the latest I heard from him is that they will hopefully be back into their house, because at the moment they are out of their house because it's just too torn up and too much going on for them to actually be in there. So at the moment they are out of the house and should be back in by this Thursday. That might have been yesterday if you're listening to the Friday version of this podcast that came out.
Days have no meaning anymore, so whatever.
Before this posts and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, what was that? July 2nd is when Tom might be back in his house, but it would be by no means a surprise if he is not actually back in his house tomorrow. So, we will continue to soldier on as best we can. Lee was available, so that worked out excellently, and there'll be another edition of AV Rant this week, which of course is your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us. Please do so by emailing us at our email address, which is question@avrant.com. That is by far the best way to get in touch with us and have your question answered on the podcast. It's pretty much first come, first serve, first in, first out. That's how we do things. But question@avrant.com is the email address. You can, of course, come to our website, which it might shock you, but it's avrant.com. That's the website for AVRant. And
curious.
You can leave a comment there. Some people have done so this past little while, so that's nice to see. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/AVRant Podcast, and we are on YouTube, youtube.com/AVRant, where videos are posted, and there are times in the show notes, so you can click around and hop from question to question without wading through the entire 2-hour thing.
There's no question asking on YouTube. We covered that last time.
We don't do it.
Forget it.
We don't do it live.
YouTube is just a different universe of humans, and you just don't want to hear from them. That's how Rob feels. And,
It was funny. I said last week that that's like the only place we get negative things. I ventured into our iTunes reviews, which normally I only see the Canadian ones because I'm on the Canadian site, but I ventured in the US ones. I'm like, oh, we've got some people who hate us there too. Because, of course, the thing you must do with your time is give a 1-star review to a podcast that no one is forcing you to listen to. There's very few of them.
Maybe it's because I have a radio background, but like haters are just charging my battery. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I thrive on the hate, and I let the flames just rise up inside me and charge me up, and it powers me. I don't care.
Well,
people can say, and they will say whatever they want, and that happens back in the day on the radio. You'd get phone calls, y'all suck. Well, okay, thank you.
Yep. Just like YouTube, everyone would be happier if there was nothing at all. That's apparently what they want. But
nothing. No one likes anything.
Don't even want to spend any time on that. I'll finish up the contact information by saying if you want to reach me just individually, I am rob@avrant.com for my email, and I'm on Twitter @FirstReflect. Tom is tom@avrant.com, and he is @avrant_Tom on Twitter. And of course, our non-pinch hitter Lee Overstreet is available on Twitter as well. Where can folks find you, Lee?
You can find me at Lee Overtweet. And yeah, I guess I'm just a hitter now. Not very pinchy.
You know, when you say pinch hitter, it's like, isn't that like a standing thing? Like every time it's that person's time to bat, the pinch hitter comes in. That's can be.
If I said anything here, it would imply I knew or cared anything about baseball.
Ah, okay.
See, I'm from Alabama. It's college football or nothing.
I see.
I think our baseball team made the playoffs a few times, but no one cares.
Well, let's start the podcast as we always do by thanking our listeners of the week, who are people who support this podcast in some way. Occasionally, that's financially, and you can do that as a one-time donation via PayPal if you please. Just come to the website, avrant.com, and over on the right-hand side, there's a link that says Support AVRant with a picture of a cup of coffee, and that will take you to PayPal if you'd like to give a one-time donation. Now, once again, Tom is the only person who sees those PayPal donations, so I do not know. It's 2 weeks in a row. We might have a long list when Tom does return to this podcast. But yes, I can't name names on PayPal for this week, but thank you very much to anyone who might have donated that way. And then we are also on Patreon, which is a way to donate automatically. You say the amount you want to give each month, and it's automatically taken from your account and given to us. That's patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you'd like to sign up. We have 119 patrons today as we're recording this. It was 120 last week, so
I'm a little concerned we lose a patron every time I'm on. I'm not sure what that means. I'm a little worried I'm runing this whole thing for you guys. I don't think that's it.
It's very normal, as I was saying. We had a little rise when we had our contest draw going on, which was awesome, and then I was expecting it to drop a little bit down, and it hasn't dropped as much as I anticipated. So I'm perfectly happy staying at 1.
Hopefully people aren't going, it's Lee again. No way.
I really don't think
no
so.
more money for them.
I pretty much only see positive feedback whenever you're here. And yes,
okay.
For anyone who lets us know that they're a patron, Clarence K, he's one fellow who said, yep, he's a Patreon supporter. We'll say your name. Just let us know if you'd like your name read out. Then that's totally cool. So Clarence, thank you for being one of our 119 patrons. And then sometimes folks support us in ways that are not financial, but we still really appreciate it. So Ken S told Parts Express that we recommended them for buying speaker wire. So he just let them know, and we're happy to have those referrals mentioned.
Every major online store and speaker manufacturer should eventually know about us.
Well, the ones we recommend anyway. Maybe not every.
That's true. Yeah, the ones where we think you're overspending or they aren't any good, they might hear about us, but that's who's on YouTube making nasty comments.
Pretty much.
This sucks. So I see we have some news and a pretty good bit of it this week. So let's jump right on into news. Vizio has made their newest flagship TVs official, and for the first time, they will offer OLED models in 55 and 65-inch sizes. And as expected for Vizio, they are aggressively priced at $1,300 and $2,000 respectively, which is $200 less than current prices on LG's BX OLEDs. That's pretty exciting. They won't ship until this fall, though, but that's okay, in time for Christmas. They have two HDMI 2.1 full 48 gigabit per second bandwidth ports, and they smartly put EARC onto a different port so that you can have two HDMI 2.1 devices plugged into the TV while using the separate EARC port to send audio to your receiver or soundbar. These are also the first OLED models in North America that support all flavors of HDR. HDR10, HLG, Dolby Vision, and HDR10 Plus are all on board. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's I mean that's pretty significant news coming out at a very aggressive price. These are, of course, using LG Display manufactured OLED panels, as that is literally the only game in town for large-size OLED displays. But
But then again, that means they have to be pretty darn good, right?
The panel is going to be good. We don't know if the processing will be up to the same level as what LG's doing, but I mean, they're coming at this whole hog. It's not all 4 HDMI ports that have HDMI 2.1, but it's 2 out of the 4 ports, which is
that's better than one,
better than 0, and it's the full 48 gigs per second, and they are supporting all the things you would hope that you would want to see supported: variable refresh rate, auto low latency mode, 4K at 120 hertz. So it's all the things that you'd be looking for. These could be really top-notch gaming monitors. It's certainly possible.
Ooh, yeah.
And I do like that they put the eARC port on a different HDMI instead of it being shared with one of the 2 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, because that way you don't have to use it just as a pass-through. You could actually plug in both forthcoming next generation video game consoles directly into the TV without having to upgrade your AV receiver.
This is exciting to me. I would love a 55-inch OLED in here. I'm sitting in my office, and I would love it for video editing because of the accuracy. You know, my cheap little LCD from Sony here, not so super accurate, but you kind of have to develop your own brain conversion factor, and you go, okay, if it looks like that on that screen, it's probably correct.
I mean, and when the MSRP is $1,300 for the 55-inch, the odds of that getting down to like $9.99 at some point on well, probably not this Black Friday, because they're probably only going to still be new at that point, but you know, next year Black Friday, really not out of the question. Might even be like Super Bowl time or something, you know? So
it's coming soon probably. And over on the LCD side, new V, M, P, and P series Quantum X models are rolling out now. Vizio is calling them their 2021 models, as they intend to roll them over into next year after delays due to coronavirus pushing everything back. The P Series and P Series Quantum X, now it makes sense to me. The P Series and P Series Quantum X get full 48 gigabit per second HDMI 2.1 ports, just like the OLEDs. And the P Quantum X is claiming up to 3,000 nits peak brightness, with full screen brightness up to 800 nits, and nearly 800 zones of local dimming on the largest 85-inch size. Speaking of which, prices are aggressive. The flagship P Quantum X models are priced at $1,500, $2,000, and $3,000 for the 65-inch, 75-inch, and 85-inch. So, yeah, you can go bigger and get cheaper if you need brighter. The regular P Series models are $300 less, with fewer local dimming zones, and there's no 85-inch size in the regular P Series. So that's the difference. So I guess if you need the super brightness, then you've got their LCDs. If you want the accuracy and the OLED blacks and the beautiful colors from OLED, you got the OLEDs. I'm just excited someone's finally dropping the price of some OLEDs.
Well, I'm really excited to see 85 inches for $3,000. Like,
yeah,
you know, you go back a couple of years, the notion of getting an 85, like a top-notch 85-inch, not just some bottom-of-the-barrel, we managed to make a panel and skimped every corner we could. Like, this is flagship-level stuff, so that's exciting to see. Again, like, there's been some reviews very recently of Sony's X900H series, which also goes up to 85 inches, and the MSRP on their 85-inch X900H is $3,500, although it's already on sale for like $3,200, $3,300. But you know, that's their model that has HDMI 2.1 with full variable refresh rate and all that kind of stuff. So these P Quantum X coming out, you know, the MSRP already being a little bit lower, but way more local dimming zones and claiming much higher peak brightness. That's going to be quite a competition going on there. That could be really interesting. It is
amazing to think about the same, less money than we spent in 2005 on a 768p plasma that didn't have HDR and weighed 100 pounds. So that's really amazing how far it has come. So I guess we'll move on to another story about YouTube. YouTube in 4K is finally coming to Apple TV 4K. That makes sense because it's 4K. And they're doing this when tvOS 14 arrives, but the details are clear as mud. Over on iOS, Apple has caved in on their refusal to support the VP9 codec. So YouTube in 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR is working on newer iPhones and iPads for beta testers via the VP9 Profile 2 codec, and that's been on my LG TV since the beginning.
Exactly.
But for the Apple TV 4K, only 4K, not HDR, has been confirmed. And the language on Apple's website specifically says it will only work for the quote-unquote latest YouTube videos in 4K, which has led to speculation that it might only work with the newer AV1 codec. Either way, it's an improvement for YouTube on the Apple TV 4K hardware, but we'll have to wait and see just how much of an improvement it ends up being. And this kind of thing always confuses me. How hard is it if you're writing the software for the Apple TV 4K or any other device, how hard is it to add the other codec?
Well, I mean, a lot. When it comes to these smaller devices, like, you know, not a full-size PC, a lot of times the codec support is like hardware encoded on the chip. So it isn't super simple to just add new codec support. It has to be software decoded at that point. Now, it has the power to do so as far as VP9 goes. It's just been a thing where Apple and Google like to fight each other, and Apple has refused to support Google's VP9 codec. Apparently until now, with iOS devices seemingly get it, at least for iOS 14, so beta testers are doing that. But yeah, the Apple TV 4K, you know, YouTube was like the one major streaming service where you couldn't even get it in 4K, let alone HDR, and that was all down to VP9. So both Apple and Google are part of the group that is championing AV1 as the next codec. So it would make complete sense for them to support that codec, and Google is transitioning, you know, some YouTube videos over to the AV1 codec now. So yeah, unclear whether, you know, VP9 is going to show up on the Apple TV 4K, but anyway, it should be an improvement. Hopefully that means the Apple TV 4K becomes an even better streaming device.
Well, to be honest, it's not like I've watched anything particularly significant on YouTube 4K 60 frames per second. It's mostly demo material and just going, wow, look at that. I've yet to see anybody doing that with quality content and making use of it in any way. Yeah, somebody probably is, and I just don't know about it. So if anyone's listening or watching this podcast and you know about content on YouTube 4K 60 frames per second that's not just demo material, I'd like to hear about it. Comments for this week. We have comments. Aidan C found a shared doc on Reddit where Plex users have made a list of all the audio and video formats that play or don't play on various pieces of hardware and different variations of the Plex app. In terms of the native Plex app, the NVIDIA Shield version supports the widest selection of formats, but there are still several formats that it doesn't support. The best selection of format support is found on the official Plex add-on for Kodi on the Xbox One S and One X. So that's the hardware and app combo to go for if you have some media files that don't play properly on other versions of Plex. Just what an exhausting thing to have to sit around and think about and figure out. I hate that, but that, you know, if you're on the bleeding or cutting or even slightly dull butter knife edge of technology, this is what it's like nowadays.
It seems to particularly impact people who download a lot of anime, because apparently the you know, encoding format of choice that a lot of anime is found on is one of the formats or several of the formats that the NVIDIA Shield has difficulty playing back, and that also applies to the actual Plex app on the Xbox One. But you can do this thing where you can have Kodi running on the Xbox One, and then Plex made an official add-on extension for Kodi. So it's like Plex within Kodi, and somehow that combination of software plays back like everything. So
it's not surprising that anime is something that needs a different codec, because animation in general, it's a different process than encoding sort of real-world images. For sharp edges and solid chunks of color.
For whatever reason, that seems to be the key thing. But yeah, if you're looking for the full audio support, you know, being able to stream full lossless Dolby True HD with Atmos extension, or DTS HD Master Audio with the DTS X extension, the NVIDIA Shield does that via the official Plex app, and this Kodi plus official Plex add-on on the Xbox One also does that. So those are your top hardware choices, and yeah, a little bit convoluted, but for Plex users, good knowledge.
Frustrating, but at least you can do some things right. Brian F. on Twitter says, thanks, AVRant. He was playing The Witcher 3 at 2 a.m. in his completely blacked out theater. That sounds dangerous, and I think it was. And had it paused for a moment. When he unpaused, an angry voice yelled at him directly to his right with a voice so convincing that Brian literally jumped out of his chair ready to fight an intruder. 20 minutes later, he still hadn't fully calmed down, so maybe there's such a thing as your speaker system sounding too realistic. That's fantastic. I mean, I've had some things where I thought somebody was on the front porch because my surround speakers are, you know, directly next to the wall where the front porch is. and I've heard sounds, and or we've had times where we're like, is it raining?
Exactly.
Oh, no, that's the show. Yeah. So man, when it's good, and very realistic. Just I can imagine though, blacked out room, and you get the fear response.
Tom mentioned the same thing about rain. He's like, sometimes he has to pause it. He's like, is it raining outside? Yeah, and had a few other people comment on Twitter with similar stories, especially like phones ringing. The phone rings in the movie, and it's completely convincing that it's your actual phone ringing. In my apartment setup, it's not as though I have a completely sound isolated room. It's just the den in my apartment. So sometimes there's, little noises that I can hear that make it through from the floor upstairs or something in the hall or something like that. So especially if it's like just little clunks or dings or something like that, it's like sometimes I can't tell. I'm like, was that in the movie or was that just someone making a sound in real life? So
I'm kind of fascinated you haven't developed apartment enemies with your system.
I mean, given how tiny my room is and how close I am to my speakers, it doesn't have to be that loud for it to be like full reference for me. So and I never watch late at night with my full system going. So 4 p.m. who's really going to complain if they hear a muffled little boom?
Yeah, good point. I've just had in my distant past in apartments and such, I've had, oh my God, I've lived in some terrible places. Brian F on Twitter. Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
We're on to questions.
How about if I scroll? What if I scroll the actual document? Hang on. Look what happens when I scroll.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll say once again, question@avrant.com is our email address to get your question onto our topic list and answered on this very podcast. So here we go.
And you just have to ask. You don't have to spend money or anything. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try to read the proper point. Neil M. How about that? I'm at the right place. Neil got his pair of SVS PC-2000 Pro cylinder subs. They make for good lampstands, and he set them up in diagonally opposite corners in his attic home theater. He ran Audyssey, and the before measurement looked pretty squiggly, but the after graph was a pretty darn flat line. And he has pictures,
Indeed.
And it looks great. Neil wasn't sure he trusted the Audyssey after graph. Why trust it? It's just a prediction, right? Not an actual measurement.
That is true. So it is not making two measurements, one before, one after. It's measuring before and then showing you what it's attempting to do.
What it's attempting, sure. So he used a Radio Shack SPL meter with a Behringer USB adapter to take some measurements using Room EQ Wizard. To his surprise, the REW graph looks very flat in the bass frequency response, but it appears as though he has some pretty long decay times. Is he interpreting that correctly? If he plays a bass sweep, it sounds very linear to his ears.
Now, that is the main thing. Pay attention to your ears and play the bass sweep.
Your ears are the most important thing.
And if you're like, hey, that bass sweep sounds pretty darn even, and I would expect it to from this measurement, which is a very darn flat line, at least at his main listening position.
It is.
Now, this graph he has only going up to 300 milliseconds, which is typical if you're measuring the mid-range. You wouldn't want to see a lot of decay times a whole lot longer than that. But in the bass, we would expect to see some decay times that might be longer than that, particularly as you start getting down towards 20 hertz and lower, which is pretty much the case in here. Now, if you're at YouTube, you can see this graph, or come to Flickr to check out the pictures for this week. But right in sort of the 45 to 60 hertz region, there's one little area there where the decay times look a little bit longer. However, what I want you to pay attention to is how even the decay times are all the way up to, it looks like about 150 milliseconds. Everything going all the way down until like 15 hertz is when it finally starts to increase. And it's only like from 150 milliseconds out to 300 milliseconds in this graph that we're seeing some decay time happening in that region. And it's like very close to the same level all in there, which to me indicates something in your room is actually making that noise, not the subwoofer itself. That would be my guess from looking at a graph like this. And this is not loud, all right? This is down at, 55 decibels, down at 45 hertz, which your human ears are going to have a heck of a time detecting. The microphone can pick it up, but your ears are going to have a heck of a time ever actually hearing that. So this can be a very low little rattle rumble that you're not even noticing because the bass sweep is playing. But the microphone is picking up that something in your room is making a little bit of noise. It's not something to worry about. This is one of the pitfalls of getting too into looking at measurements, because you're going to see imperfections that just aren't really detectable or important to your actual human ears. So those are really clean looking measurements for your bass, ridiculously flat response. And for anyone who's like, hey, how come it's actually kind of sloping down a little bit? Wouldn't we want it sloping up a little bit? He used a Radio Shack SPL meter, which naturally has a roll-off below 80 hertz. Now, Room EQ Wizard, if you tell it that the microphone you're using is a Radio Shack SPL meter, has compensation tables built into it, but you're going to still see that sort of general, very slight roll-off.
It is a very slight 0.5% angle there, just coming down.
So that could just be the microphone.
He could walk around his room and hold his hand against things and feel like a window or a bookshelf. See
that
what
can
might
be
be buzzing.
Your HVAC register is a common culprit.
Yeah.
It could be a doorway, very common culprit.
And you could solve some problems like that.
But it's like you might have
just for fun.
You might have a heck of a time tracking that down because it is nothing severe.
Just walk around and feel things.
Yeah.
I would walk around and feel things just out of curiosity. I'd wonder if he can, like, oh man, yeah, this AC register is buzzing over here. It's something to think about. He also measured all the way up to 4,000 hertz, and there appear to be some larger ups and downs above the bass region, as well as overall shorter decay times, but not completely even. Is that just to be expected, or is there something he could do objectively to improve things further? And we have a picture of his room, which does have a lot of bookshelves.
Oh yes, yeah, a lot of bookshelves. This is an attic space, so the ceiling is pitched in on two sides from the A-frame of the attic. But yeah, looking at the measurements, this going up to 4,000 hertz, from 10 hertz all the way up to 4,000 hertz, and we're seeing some squiggles. And again, because this was measured with an SPL meter, I'm not going to panic over any little peaks, because an SPL meter is not the world's most accurate microphone. It's good in if you're playing pink noise sense, but when you're playing individual frequencies, I'm not going to panic about any sort of, and these are very narrow peaks, which even more suggests that it might just be a microphone anomaly more than the frequency actually peaking that much at that particular frequency. So I'm not too worried about that. Now, what we're seeing, and something that I could make a suggestion potentially, is that going from, let's say, about 1 kilohertz up to 4 kilohertz, the decay times up there are actually a little bit longer than the decay times from like 100 hertz up to about 1 kilohertz. And that is an indication, again, take it with a grain of salt because the measurement microphone isn't the most accurate type, but it's an indication that you might benefit from some diffusion in this room. And the most likely candidate for where that diffusion would be beneficial would be on the angled portions of your ceiling.
We've talked about other people's rooms with angled ceiling portions, and you've suggested just pad the whole thing,
pretty much
the whole angle, or cover it in diffusion panels.
But in your case, since the bass is already looking so good in this room, the chances that you need a great deal more absorption in here is pretty low. When you're talking about the higher frequencies, especially the 2 to 4 kilohertz range, that's where diffusion is going to have an impact much more so than absorption. So you have your bookshelves, but they're low down in this room, right? The bookshelves are low in this room and possibly even below ear level when you're seated. So the likelihood that those are giving you enough diffusion in this room to combat that, that's pretty low. Like I say, it's probably coming from those angled parts of your ceiling, and some diffusion on those parts might help you out.
So if he got like 4 diffusion panels, one on each side of those windows.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that would be very nice. The room's fully carpeted. He has printed absorption panels on his side and back walls. He also has some bass trapping in the shelves along both side walls. Nothing on his front wall, and that is almost entirely taken up with his projection screen. And nothing on his ceiling, much of which is angled since this is an attic. And so he's asking what we think, and I think we've said what we think.
Absolutely.
Some diffusion on those angled walls would be the first thing to try.
Yes, sir.
Ken B has questions. Ken helped his father pick out an LG B9 OLED, very nice, based on our recommendation. They also picked up a Yamaha YAS 108 soundbar. He and his wife do not sit directly facing the TV. Both of them are at off angles. For TV shows, things actually seem fine, but he's finding that a lot of movies have the music and effects so loud that it makes dialogue harder to hear and understand. The Yamaha soundbar only has 2 channels, so there is no dedicated center that can be turned up independent of the left and right channels. The clear voice setting doesn't do enough to make movie watching enjoyable for them. Ken's father already owns a nice pair of Paradigm speakers and an old Denon receiver that does not have any HDMI inputs, so should Ken find him a different soundbar that has a dedicated center, or should he get a center speaker and hook that up along with his father's pair of Paradigms? That's the direction I'd be leaning.
I mean, given what you already have in hand, I would certainly lean that direction. I mean, you can get a really, really nice center speaker that matches the Paradigms that are already in hand. Certainly for the same price, probably less than a new soundbar. And the sound quality is going to be superior.
It is.
There's really not much question.
And you can
that.
goose that center channel a little bit, add a few decibels until they both can get that localized, focused dialogue from the middle. Yeah, man, do that if they don't mind the additional equipment sitting there.
Oh, for sure.
If it can fit there and look nice, then yeah.
And plus, you'll feel good about making use of the AV receiver and Paradigm speakers that are already on hand, which seemingly aren't being used for, at least not for that purpose at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, he's implying it's just sitting around doing nothing, and that just breaks my heart. Pull it out and use it.
I vote center speaker to match all the way.
Absolutely. Can you even run a speaker setup as 3.0? Sure. For some reason, Ken's father really does not want surround sound or a, quote, theater experience, meaning strong bass. I've got a lot of comments on that. They went for the YAS 108 largely because it does not come with the subwoofer. I've met people who described what they didn't like the same way. I don't want it loud. I don't want big boomy bass. What they don't know they mean is they want accurate sound that doesn't hurt their ears.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what they mean. And so what can you sneak a subwoofer in the corner and have it running and just don't tell them that's what it's doing? And they're just, oh, this is very nice. Because it's not a subwoofer's fault. It's not bass's fault. It's inaccuracy.
And
it's
I certainly
harshness.
Don't blame anyone who's had the negative experience of having heard a poorly set up and configured subwoofer, and it is going boom, 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 and it's absolutely not what you want. However, I'm not going to choose this hill to die on. I'm not going to fight a whole bunch here because, I mean, we have to consider price as well. So to get a really nice subwoofer to match the type of system that he's talking about, not going to be super inexpensive. So I think if you stick with the 3.0 setup, that you will be very happy with that. I mean, Paradigm speakers are very capable speakers. So, you know, I don't have many qualms with that. You can absolutely run it as 3.0. That's no problem whatsoever. So yeah, that's what I would do. I'm still voting to that you grab a center speaker to match.
So he also asked, will he need a new receiver? They do use the TV's built-in apps, so does he need audio return channel? They actually really liked how that all connected and worked with the soundbar. You can run an optical cable.
Yes. Yeah.
And that just ends it right there.
Yeah, and that's what you would do in this case. You'd run an optical cable out of the television into the AV receiver. Your older Denon receiver definitely has an optical input. I'm certain of that, unless it's truly ancient, but I don't think it was even called Denon at the time. As far as I know, by the time the brand name Denon existed, you had optical connections on there, and you wouldn't be losing anything as far as quality goes by doing that. You certainly don't need an Atmos signal to make it back when you're running a 3.0 speaker setup. So yeah, you're in good shape there. It's going to be a nice thin little optical cable that's going from the TV to the AV receiver. That would actually be, in this instance, the only cable between the TV and the AV receiver, so I can't imagine someone objecting to a skinny little optical cable being the only thing there. So yeah, that should be in good shape.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Just a 5.1 signal comes out of the TV in that case, and the receiver translates it to the 3.0. Mike S. After 2 years of work, Mike's Basement Theater is finally done. Pretty much. It's never really done.
It's never really entirely done, but
that's why we're saying pretty much. There's no such thing as completely done. Any project on a home is never completely done. An upstairs plumbing issue, oh boy, resulted in a flood in the basement, which obviously meant a delay. Thankfully, the theater itself wasn't affected, but the dead vent just outside his theater took the brunt of the water and remains out of commission. Oof. We've been with him through the whole process, and our input has helped him make decisions throughout. He might modify or add some more acoustic treatments, but other than that, the inside of the theater is done. Probably. He'd like to share some of his journey and mention several things he would do differently in the hopes that it might help some others with their home theater builds. And I'm sure this is true. He started with a finished basement with a large opening. And he has sent us pictures where we're seeing the framing and the insulation. And yes, it is a nice large space, appropriate. He tore it down to the studs to get there. Then he framed and laid out the positioning for his projection screen and the Focal Superbird on-wall speakers that we recommended to him. Then, because he was trying to save space but also have effective soundproofing, he installed sound clips and hat channels. Perfect. Look at that. And we have more beautiful pictures of that. Now that he's been through it, he says he would have taught himself to use some design software instead of trying to plan everything out in the room itself. And since the walls are not load-bearing, much like Andrew's advice from a few weeks ago, Mike would highly recommend just building detached wall framing instead of bothering with sound clips and hat channels. The weak spot in his soundproofing ended up being the air exchange. So he would put more planning into that if he had to do it over. As mentioned, it's out of commission from the flood, and it turns out his basement stays cool enough without it, even during hot weather, that it wasn't really even necessary.
Live and learn, but good tips. Yeah, we're seeing multiple people now saying this whole sound clip and hat channel business, while effective, that honestly, if you're going to be putting up new walls anyway that aren't load bearing, that just have them decoupled from the other side of the wall. You know, if that's staggered studs, which only costs you 1.5 inches, you know, which is about the same as what sound clips and hat channels cost you in terms of square footage. Right. So that's just so much easier, faster, less expensive, less hassle for hanging the drywall. And I fully endorse that message. That makes all the sense in the world to me.
There you go. All along, he had a detailed plan for the soffit pattern on the ceiling. That houses his Atmos speakers and much of the lighting for the room, and it looks really, really cool. He has a lot of lights and several zones to control it, but he would make even more zones now that he's been through it. Yeah, he said been through it. I know what he means.
Yeah.
He's been through it. Hanging the drywall himself was okay, but he would highly recommend hiring a pro to do all the mudding and taping. The ceiling ended up taking 10 times as long as a flat surface. Yeah, you know, people that do drywall are actually not terribly expensive. I've noticed,
and they're
with
fast.
Other people doing it.
The guys who do
super
it are
fast.
fast.
I mean, you could do it yourself, but guys that do it all the time, boom, up and done.
And they have you wouldn't purchase some of the equipment just to finish one room, but when that's their profession, they have the equipment where, you know, the tape mud dispenser thing that they have is so rapid, and they just come along, slap along all the seams, and it's just done in minutes. It's kind of ridiculous. And I, again, completely agree. The laborious stuff, hanging individual sheets of drywall, not that bad. You know, even if you have to use a drywall lift and put in some screws, not that bad. But yeah, the taping and the mudding, sometimes, Mike is skilled at trim work, so that was fine for him. But I wouldn't want to touch trim work. I'm going to hire somebody to do that. They're going to do it so much faster than I'll do trim work that it's worth it for the amount I would lose in time versus the cost out of pocket. Yeah.
The only trim work I've ever done is around 2 exterior doors on the inside of the kitchen. And that took me forever, but I was showing everybody afterwards. I was so proud. Look how perfect that 45-degree angle is right there at the top. And yes, I think it's funny that he said the ceiling ended up taking 10 times as long as a flat surface. My wife and I, we have what we call the 10 times rule for home improvement. However long you think it's going to take,
yes.
it takes 10 times longer. So if you look at a project and go, I'll get that done in 2 days, it's 20 days. Every time. This will take an hour, 20 hours.
Probably good advice.
It's always 10 times. He built a back row seating riser, painted the walls and ceiling, and mounted all the speakers. Then he began the process of framing and installing his DIY acoustic treatments. And again, we have pictures for all this. Go look, because it looks sharp. It looks so good, I think. If he had it to do over, he wouldn't have gone to the trouble of all the in-wall electrical and wire runs. He could have used surface-mounted conduits since his acoustic treatments could have hidden them all. But he would have recessed his surround and back speakers since they stick out a bit more than he would have ideally liked. He would have also adjusted the heights of his wall sconces to better follow the acoustic panels and seating riser heights. He and his wife picked out new carpet, and with fabric applied to the wall treatments and all the trim painted, the room is finally finished, probably. And again, gorgeous.
Yes, it looks
now that
really
it's
nice.
done.
I mean, the funny thing was, you know, going back in time to like when he basically just had the room without any acoustic treatments and all that, I was like, that room looks pretty good. But by the time you get to the full finished result, you're like, oh. that's extra slick.
It is super sharp. I mean, that's the kind of room I would try to put together, frankly.
And the ceiling detail, because before we're just seeing the grid of soffits, but he's actually got like soft lighting up inside of there. You know, so it's kind of like this almost halo glow light above, and then he's got individual little puck lights for when he wants more, and there's sort of like a trim lighting all around and sconces and that, and he's saying he would do even more zones than he did if he had
Yes, his ceiling is sort of futuristic to me. It looks like if you lived on a space station and had artificial light to simulate skylights. That's what it looks like to me.
Right.
So I don't think you can float in the room, but it looks very futuristic, spacey on the ceiling. Now that it's done, he would have gone even darker for the carpet. But the biggest change he would have made is that he would have kept all of his home theater gear inside the theater instead of putting it all in a rack on the other side of the basement. The challenges with long HDMI runs and IR control were not worth it. So instead of just a niche for his game systems, he would have built the whole rack into the theater. Live and learn. Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm a big fan of if this is a home theater room, the electronics are part of that. Accept the electronics into your style. Make it part of it, to me. I mean, some people want that super duper clean, you can't tell what's making this movie happen kind of look. But I kind of like to see some electronics. I mean, maybe in the back of the room.
I am a personal fan of having my speakers and electronics visible, but that, of course, is just me. For anyone who wants,
I'm with you.
wants the super clean look, I don't blame them one bit. But again, we've heard from more than one person that, you know, at the end of it all, when you have a dedicated equipment closet, if it's right outside of your theater, you know, just on the other side of the wall, that tends to not be too much of an issue. But if you have a lot of people have like a centrally located equipment closet for pretty much the whole house, and the sort of long cable runs that you have to do, and then if you do have to attempt any troubleshooting, you know, the extra wrinkle that throws into it, that since he built in a niche to hold his video game systems, he's like, I could have just made that bigger and all of my equipment could have gone in there and it all would have been inside and hidden by acoustic panels. So, when you're doing a project like this, question every one of your own decisions. Just double check everything in your own mind and picture it another way. And sometimes it's pretty much, can I make this simpler, shorter, fewer holes to drill? Those are the if there is a way to do so. But I mean, at the same time, you have a sort of overall vision in mind, but you haven't physically built the room yourself prior. That's why these types of tips are super valuable to hear. Again, like, you know, we had that wonderful curtain skirt idea where even if you're not building full wainscoting and treating like Mike did, that, you know, just a literal piece of fabric that runs around the bottom of your walls instead of just baseboard. You can put all your wires there on the outside of your wall. You won't notice it, and if you ever need to change anything, way easier than having to dig it out of the wall.
You can put some sound absorption behind those little fabric pieces as well. Some quick reviews from him. He got the HT Design Sheffield recliners for his primary front row, and he couldn't be happier with them. Scary to buy them internet direct, but our interview with Alan Hutchinson helped convince him, and they turned out great. The motorized headrest helps a bit with the arthritis in Mike's neck, and while the wine glass holders seemed a bit pricey, his wife has fallen asleep with a wine glass in her hand before, so money well spent.
I like that.
But he didn't say she spilled it, and so I'm actually super impressed. The lighting under the footrest is too bright, so that has been disconnected, but that's the only nitpick. Second, Gick gave him a ton of advice for free, so he wanted to buy at least a few panels from them. He was slightly disappointed as it appears he took more time and did a cleaner job of folding and securing the fabric around the corners of his own DIY panels. but nothing major, and he's very happy with their service. I find that interesting that he sounds a little OCD like me, and I like it.
Well, particularly
like
when
this.
he has put so much care into this. So I completely understand that. Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, GIK got a lot of attention when they burst onto the scene because they were providing acoustic panels that perform very well objectively. The measurements demonstrate that they perform very well at prices that were way undercutting most of the other professional acoustic panels that you could purchase out there. Some of that is that, it's, they're making it by hand in their warehouse. But yeah, probably not taking every minor detail of the folding of the fabric. They're trying to do it a little bit expediently. So yeah, I'm willing to accept that. I think that's a valid criticism. But at the same time, once the lights are off and the movie is on, he's not looking at the corners of his acoustic panels.
That's right. And I don't think he means that GIK was just slapping panels together willy-nilly. He just means his folds were just as obsessively perfect as he could get them, and GIK was not better.
Exactly.
So put it that way. Some questions he has. His original plans were for dual SVS SB-3000 sealed subs, yay! But he ended up going with dual PB-2000 Pro ported subs instead, and he loves them. But he can admit they actually have more output than he truly needs. And I believe that because the 2000 Pros that I have, the sealed ones, let me just tell you real quick, I'm finding bass in surprising places. We were watching a comedy. What was it? I forget. It was a wacky night before graduation high school comedy. Booksmart, I think it was called. Yeah. Hilarious, cute little movie. But the music, lots of dance and rap and stuff like that. The bass was great. It was crazy. It was just, I swear my pants legs were flapping. What's
and
going on?
And you're not even in an enclosed room. Mike's is an enclosed room where he can actually pressurize the whole darn thing.
So yeah, and his ported subs, they're big, and that's what you and Tom were both telling me. It's like, no, because I suggested for a moment that I probably could have gotten away with the ported ones, and y'all are like, no. We warned him they were big. We always bring it up, tell people to make a cardboard box first, but guys, they're big. So now they barely fit. Having them at the midpoint of the front wall and the midpoint of the back wall, it was immediately evident that he had found the correct placement. And that's what happened to me. Similar. But the one on the back wall sticks out far enough that it actually makes it a bit tough to recline the back row seats. So, man, I'm telling y'all, these subs are real. And they take up real space. Could he just turn it sideways? I would say yes. No harm there. That would open up just the few extra inches he needs behind his back row. Or does he need to trade in for SB-3000s? He isn't too keen to switch to a PC-2000 Pro cylinder since he would have to redo a whole section of the acoustic panels on his back wall for the much taller cylinder version. You can turn it sideways.
You can definitely just turn it sideways. Yeah, they are not as wide as they are deep, the PB-2000 Pro subs. So yeah, there is no reason why that driver and ports have to be facing forward into the room. You can turn it sideways. It will not change the performance in any perceptible
that's what's weird
way.
about when we think about speakers, regular speakers with tweeters and such, you think about you aim them towards you. But a subwoofer is sloshing the water in a bathtub. Is basically what's happening, right? So you don't have, it doesn't have to aim one way or the other. It's going to push the sound around the room. I've lost my place. Give me just a second. We're on to B. Sorry, I'm having a hard time today keeping my place. Too much caffeine before we started. The PB-2000 Pro at the front of his room acts as his center speaker stand. It's big. He reminds everyone. His SVS Prime center speaker ends up being high enough that visually it is within the bottom edge of his screen's frame. But thankfully it is just below the bottom edge of the screen itself. Over Father's Day weekend, he had the whole house to himself so he could crank it as loud as he wanted, and he went all the way up to full reference volume. His Denon X6400H is powering all 11 channels, actually 13 speakers since he has 2 pairs of side surrounds, and he is sitting almost 12 feet from his screen, but only about 10 feet from his center speaker since it's out in front. Everything sounded good except for the center. At this very high output level, it didn't sound quite as clean as he would have liked. All along, he's thought he might like to upgrade to the Ultra Center, but the larger size made that problematic. Should he give one a try anyway, or could this maybe be an amplification issue? I don't have enough experience with those speakers. Rob, what do you think?
I have a completely different culprit in mind.
There you go.
Due to the restrictions on height that he had, because he can't get this center speaker any higher than it is, sitting atop the PB2000 Pro. In all the images he's ever sent, I have never noted anything in between the center speaker and the subwoofer, because he was trying to save every portion of an inch that he could. I really think that you had some cabinet noise, that the little bit of vibration of the speaker and the subwoofer itself, without any sort of damping material between the center speaker and the subwoofer, is the cause of any sort of distortion that you might have been hearing. 10 feet away from the speaker, the SVS Prime Center has no difficulty playing all the way up to full reference volume. And if this were an amplification issue, you would have been noticing it in your other speakers as well, not just the center. Because it's getting the lion's share of the content. So I don't, in my heart of hearts, believe it's either of those things. I think this is a mechanical vibration issue, where having damping material in between, you know, if you got some, I mean, it doesn't have to be Oralex Mo pads, but there's like the SM pads that cost about $25 for a pair of those. But then that's going to add like 2 inches of height, which he couldn't do. Even just putting museum putty might be enough, but given that it's a subwoofer acting as your stand, that's moving a fair amount. Just museum putty alone might not be enough to dampen. I'd want a proper damping pad. So, 2 things. One, you can, of course, bring in an SVS Ultra Center and audition it, because it's free to send it back. So I don't have a problem with that, but it is even taller. But there is no reason why you cannot take your PB2000 Pro and lay it on its side.
I was about to say,
which will reduce its
if you
height.
If you don't want to move it to one side and then get a stand for your center speaker, you could do that. But yeah, you could lay it over.
No, just, yeah.
But then you would need to decouple it from the floor a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
normally.
that's why he did do it, because he got the sound path isolation feet, which of course screw nicely into the bottom, you know, where the feet are supposed to go in the bottom. I'm pretty sure that's why he didn't attempt to just. So I'm talking about turning what is currently its width into its height by just laying it on its side. But you can take the sound path isolation feet, you unscrew them from the current bottom, and you won't have screw holes to put them in, but you use some museum putty to hold the sound path isolation feet to the side of the subwoofer that it has now become the bottom of the sub. So that'll gain you the height that you need to be able to put some type of like a foam isolation, a monitor isolation pad, like the SM pads, in between the subwoofer and the center speaker. And then by all means, go ahead and audition the Ultra Center. You will now have the height to be able to do so. And yeah, that'll tell you everything you need to know.
So his first step would be just to block a little bit of his screen and fold up a blanket underneath the center speaker he has now.
Oh, you could do that, yeah.
Just to test
or
and see if
pads.
it is this mechanical vibe. Or mouse pads. Yeah, anything, put a cushion from a chair under it. Whatever separates it with some squishiness, and just see if that changes. Then you know which direction you're going after that. The Denon X6700H got announced. Should he consider moving up to 13 channels? This is really him asking, I want to consider moving up to 13 channels. It was on his mind from the very beginning, he says, and it would give him an excuse to buy an external amp. He read that it might actually provide its own dynamic tone mapping. Is that true? It might be helpful with his JVC RS540 projector. So what do we say? Can the 6700H be justified? He wants you and me to justify it for him.
I definitely want to address the whole video side with the dynamic tone mapping thing, because from everything that I can tell, that was just some people having misinterpreted the HDMI 2.1 feature, which is the HDMI 2.1 version of dynamic tone mapping, which I've never really fully understood, because it's not HDR10 Plus and it's not Dolby Vision. It's supposed to be some kind of like almost generic version of dynamic tone. It's never been completely clear, but it's been one of these features that's been on the spec sheet of HDMI 2.1 since it first came out, that it would support dynamic tone mapping, which we already do via Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus without HDMI 2.1. But I think some people saw that specification now that the X6700H has one HDMI 2.1 input on it, and thought that it was some kind of new feature, that the AV receiver itself is applying dynamic tone mapping like an LG display might. But that is not the case. It is not true. It's not something that's going to apply to your projector where now the AV receiver is doing, dynamic tone mapping. That's not the case. So you wouldn't buy it for that. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the reason. Now, I can't recall what he wired. I can't recall if he wired for a full 9.2.6 setup, and he has the option of both front wides and top middles, in addition to
because as we covered last week, that's the best.
Yes, you want the best 9.1.6. The best. If you wanna go nuts. But he was saying that like the X8500H was already too expensive for the budget he's looking for. The 6700H, maybe, once it gets down to about 2,000, he might consider it. So I don't think he's going to go all the way up to a $4,000 processor plus 15 channels of external amplification. I think the sort of $2,000 to $2,500 range is where he would max out. I'm going to tell you, enjoy what you have for a good long while. Really pay attention to some Atmos content. If it just starts to bother you that you don't have a pair of speakers directly overhead, then maybe a 7.2.6 will give you that. It'll add those top middle speakers into the middle, although the content still has to be encoded to actually make use of the position. It's not like they magically make sound when the content didn't have anything positioned there. I don't remember if he wired for front wides. I'm a front wide fan. I can give you that as the excuse. I like front wides, so if you wired for them, maybe, although it kind of looks like his doorway would be kind of close.
Maybe
it's back far enough. He might have left enough room for a front wide at the 60-degree azimuth angle there to his left and right. So if anything, that might be it. I'd say pay attention to some Atmos content. Don't go nuts just yet. If you really want the overhead or the wides, you could maybe do that, but it's kind of hard to justify. Gotta be true.
Like so many things we talk about on this show, when you already have a very good setup, like if you didn't have anything and you could afford to go all the way, like Rob says, with was it 15?
Yeah, 15 speakers, 2 subs. Yeah.
Then that's one thing. But if you're already at 13, the move to 15.
Actually, he'd be at 17 speakers since he has 2 pairs of surrounds. But 4 of those speakers are playing only 2 channels. But yeah.
So maybe not right now. Sorry, but if you got the money to burn and you just want to do it, do it. Sure. Do it and call us or email us and let us know and we'll talk about it. He started playing with Room EQ Wizard. I need to do that as well. He has dual subs playing in mono with only one subwoofer output feeding both of them. Looking at his measurements, he's quite satisfied that he has very uniform response across his 3 front seats and also uniform response across his 3 back seats. The front row response also looks very linear, but the back row has a significant valley, and one seat in the back row appears to have a null close to 70 hertz. When we have a graph to show that, he has the front row and the back row, and there is a odd little thing in that one seat back there. If he's being honest, he doesn't care that much about the back row. Okay, great. I understand that. But he's just wondering if there's some way to improve on this response. He isn't sure if the waterfall graph for his main listening
we should
position...
answer that first, because the waterfall I'll separate as a question there. Sure. Honestly, the only thing that you could do would be to move your seats. Realistically speaking, that the back row would just have to be moved farther away from the physical back wall. Looking at the front row, which is the primary row that he really, really cares about, that is some very uniform linear bass response that he has. That is wonderful to see. That is everything we hope for with the dual subwoofer setup and a little bit of room equalization applied. He's got flat response down to what, about I mean, 17 hertz, maybe 16 hertz, like a
Yes.
flat line from the crossover of 80 hertz right down there, and in all
it's beautiful.
in all three seats. So all across that front row seating, everybody's getting the same experience as far as the bass goes. Now, yeah, there's no question in the back row. I mean, what's interesting is that it actually is very uniform, all things considered.
That's
so,
true.
I mean, if you're not opposed to a slight hump around 40 hertz in the front row, which a lot of people actually kind of like because it's
that's the kick drum kind of chest
kick
thumping
drum.
frequency.
It's the tactile thump you in the chest type of bass. A lot of people like to have a little bit of a bump there. So given the response that he has in his back row, it would raise that up in that region a little bit closer to linearity and give you a bit of a hump in the front row, which you might find pleasing. So that wouldn't be the worst thing. Now, the one seat that looks like it kind of has a null, really nothing much you can do about that without physically moving the seat. The other thing is it could just be a microphone anomaly. It's not something I would panic over. It's a narrow, almost notch, which means that it's not going to be super noticeable. That becomes the last seat that you fill out.
Right.
You know, but yeah, realistically, there's not a whole lot that you can do without physically moving the seats away from the back wall.
Yeah, that would be a difficult experiment if everything is sort of set in its position, so wouldn't worry about that. He isn't sure if the waterfall graph for his main listening position indicates any problems or not. Can we help him make sense of it? And so what we're looking at is a 10 to 20,000 hertz waterfall graph with various decay times of various frequencies.
So it's not actually going up to 20K. What do you make of it? Yeah, he
that's the label on it.
Yeah, that's the label. This is only showing up to 127. So we're looking at the bass again with 300 millisecond response time. And again, very similarly, and as expected when you have very, very linear bass response, nothing problematic here. No. Again, below 20 hertz, I mean, from 25 hertz down to 10 hertz is where you're starting to see some longer decay times. We would 100 expect that to be the case. No problem with that being the case. Again, a tiny little something going on between like 45 and 55 hertz, but
that's what he's seeing, I bet. Right out there, there's a little something.
But it's so low in amplitude and only in the section that's after like 200 milliseconds in this graph. That is not a subwoofer problem. It's not something I think you're even going to be able to ever hear. Again, I mean, the most likely candidate is that we're talking about like an air duct that is ever so slightly resonating, because that is the sort of the common frequency where that happens. But it's so low and so inconsequential that, again, you can see it in the graph, but I don't think you're ever going to hear it.
But again, if you want to walk around, like I said before, and put your hand on things, play bass sweeps and just touch everything in the room, just palm everything that could possibly vibrate and see what you feel. Maybe you'll find it. You look
like you have exactly what we're hoping for with the dual sub setup. I think you've nailed it.
Yes, and I can tell you from my experience, if your graph looks that good, stop. Stop and enjoy movies. It's time to quit. So it's looking really good there for him. All right. Now that we are into this a solid hour or so, we have new questions.
That's how it always goes with us.
The second hour is new questions. Aidan C has a new question. After we discussed Aidan's A8G Sony OLED and described how it doesn't really show Dolby Vision content correctly, he opted to exchange it for an LG B9 OLED instead. He hooked up the settings that Rob posted for his B7 OLED, and he looked up the settings and noted the different day mode and night mode settings. Aidan would find that useful, as he often watches with lights on and sometimes watches with the lights off. That's how I do it. But does he have to manually switch the picture mode? That would be annoying. Is there a way to do it automatically? And I haven't found an automatic way to do it, but I watch the lights on 90% of the time.
Yeah, there's not a automatic. I'm not sure how your television would be aware, but there is an ambient room light sensor.
There is.
That does exist, but I'm not a fan of using it because
it's not that hard with the LG remote to pop between the
picture modes.
The dark mode and the light mode.
Because you're literally just hitting the settings button, and then right there along. Let's see, on the B9s, did they move it? I think it's on the left-hand side by the time you get to the B9s. The little strip.
It's on the
Is it on the right-hand side?
I I think it's
now
on
with
right,
the B10 that they moved it over to the left, whatever it is, a little strip of icons, a little vertical strip of icons will show up on one side of your screen. And yeah, I mean, you just go down to picture mode and switch between ISF dark and ISF bright.
Yeah, you're just popping it left and
And
right.
I mean,
Once you get good at it, you can do it in about 5 seconds.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, if you have a harmony, you could even create a sequence to go back and forth between the two of those. So a single button press to go between your picture modes if you want to do it with a harmony. But yeah, there's no automatic way to do it other than activating the ambient room light sensor, which I don't recommend because that can pump your light levels. You know, somebody walks in front of the television, it all of a sudden dims down because the light sensor was occluded from the light source for a moment, and then you see it pump itself down and pump back
or
up. And
a cloud passes over your house.
Yeah,
Exactly. So that's the answer. It's not too hard to pop between the two modes, the dark and light room mode. He has a 5.2 setup at the moment using SVS Ultra series speakers. The room is about 16 feet by 12.5 feet, and he is sitting 10 feet from a 120-inch screen. If he adds 4 Atmos speakers, would it be better to get prime elevations to mount high up on his walls or prime satellites to mount on his ceiling? And would it be better to go front heights and top middles, or top fronts and top rears, or maybe front heights and rear heights? There are a lot of choices, and it kind of always depends on your room.
Yes.
And what you want to see.
I mean, he's got a compact room. He's got a nice amount of space behind his primary seat. 10 feet from a 120-inch screen sounds delightful to me in a 16-foot long room. I would probably, as long as the price is fine by you, I would probably point you to the prime elevations either way. Because your room is quite narrow, so having them high up on the sidewalls would absolutely work. Or if you wanted to mount them directly on the ceiling, the prime elevations have the bracket to do that as well. And you could just have them mounted on the ceiling. They'd have a little angle on them, but it's almost as though everybody keeps begging us to change our answer to say that angles from the overhead speakers are okay anyway. And I mean, they are okay. It's just you don't need them for an in-ceiling speaker. But I think I would go prime elevations either way in this case, as long as you're okay with the price. Now, whether it's the combination of front heights and top middles, or top fronts and top rears, or front heights and rear heights, honestly, in a room your size, you're probably not going to have worlds of difference. The major difference will be whether you have top middles or not. Because if you really, really want the experience of that is directly above me, it's not the easiest thing to stereo locate above us. So if you have some speakers in front of you and some speakers behind you, you don't always get the sense that it's directly above you without speakers physically there. Or in your case, they might be high up on the sidewalls and angled in, but directly above you. If you really, really want that experience, then I would go ahead and put in some top middles, and then naturally you'd have front heights as the second pair. But if what you want is actually what they set things up as when they're mixing for the home, and what you want is to be able to pan things forward and back, side to side as much as possible, then the standard arrangement of top fronts and top rears in terms of placement, meaning 45-degree elevation and angle in front of you and 45-degree elevation angle behind you, that is where I would physically position them. But I would throw in the wrinkle of actually labeling them inside of your AV receiver as front heights and rear heights, simply because DTS-X works better with those labels for positions. And where DTS-X wants you to put front heights and rear heights is at 45-degree elevation angles in front of you and behind you. So it's sort of the common denominator of that physical position with the label of front heights and rear heights gives you the best experience between both Atmos and DTS-X.
So we're saying the sort of top front, top rear is more how things tend to be mixed.
That tends to be how they're mixed. Like Sony,
see.
for certain, every Sony movie that's mixed in Atmos, they have a 7.1.4 speaker setup with overhead speakers at 45-degree elevation angles in front and behind.
But the front heights and top middles are just more effect for the listener. It's more obvious.
It's more obvious
dramatic.
that it's directly above your head.
I gotcha.
So
okay, well, I'm a big fan of what did the director want me to hear? That's what I like.
I've gone for the, overhead in front and behind, but labeled them as front heights, rear heights. That's what I've chosen to do.
Okay.
But I don't get the effect that it's directly above my head. So, and some people, that's what they want most. So there's no right or wrong. I can't tell you, if you have a preference and that's fine. But that should allow you to decide.
I got it. I got it. In Aidan's office, he uses a pair of B&W 685 bookshelf speakers with an SVS PB-12 subwoofer. He enjoys the sound quality, and he's fine with the size of the subwoofer, but the bookshelf speakers take up more desk space than he would like. Any suggestions for smaller speakers to sit on his desk or potentially be wall-mounted? And I know you have a recommendation.
Yeah. So I mean, the B&Ws that he has, they are particularly deep, is where they take up. They're 12 and 3/4 inches
over a
deep.
foot deep.
Yeah. So that I can see that taking up some space. So I'm pretty much always going to point someone who's got a desktop setup to Audio Engine. I think those are great speakers to use on a desktop setup. And since he's powering them with an AV receiver, he'd want the passive ones. So they have their P4. It's the P4 passive speakers from Audio Engine. They go for $250 a pair. Now, they're not tiny. They're 9 inches tall, but his previous speakers were 13.5 inches tall. They're 5.5 inches wide, but his previous ones were 7.5 inches wide. And then key, they're 6.5 inches deep instead of 12 and 3/4 inches deep. So they are definitely a smaller footprint and a smaller speaker.
They would feel much smaller.
And if you do want to wall mount them, it's easy to do. They have wall mount holes on the back for a standard wall mount, and they are front slot ported, so mounting them on the wall is no problem. There's no rear port to worry about, and the terminal cup for the binding post is recessed so they can go pretty darn flat against the wall.
Further in his office, he has a Denon X1400H. He has his B&W speakers set to small, but for some reason, whenever he uses AirPlay, they get set to large, and his subwoofer is silent. If he manually changes his speaker's size to large and then back to small, it works fine, and his subwoofer kicks in as it should. Any idea why it can't seem to hold the speaker's size setting for AirPlay? That just sounds like a model-specific bug.
It really seems like it's just a glitch, because the X1400H is not one of the models that has the separate settings for just the stereo listening mode. It's only the almost flagship models in the lineup that have that separate setting. So it's not that. It's not that there's just a separate stereo listening mode setting. It doesn't seem to be a problem with any of his other sources. It seems to just be AirPlay. I think it's just a bug. It's not something I can answer. I don't know why that's the case. You could try reaching out to Denon to see if there's anything, but given that it's only that one source that it's happening with, my guess is that it's just a bug, which is unfortunate, but I think that's what it is.
Maybe ask Denon just to see if they've heard of such a thing. But that's the only thing that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
we saw that other bug on a Marantz receiver where somehow, changing the analog input assign went and turned the radio tuner off. So there are sometimes some very weird bugs going on, and I think that's what this is.
That's right. Some line of code somewhere that got programmed in. Okay, moving on to Gurinder, who I've heard from before, as we were last week even,
and he says the pronunciation is fine, so we're not offended.
Gurinder. How about that? Awesome. He's considering raising the height of his back row of seats by 6 inches or so. It would provide better sight lines for his kids when they sit back there. It's a sectional microfiber sofa. At the moment, he has absorption panels on his back wall, but if he raises the back seats, he'd need to raise those absorption panels too. That would mean those panels would actually be a bit above seated height for the front row. So how badly would that affect the sound for the front row? Will having the microfiber sofa behind it provide similar absorption to what he has now? My guess is not going to hurt it.
I do not foresee this being a problem. This is not the same as going back to a flat, reflective, hard wall behind you. This is an absorption cushiony thing. You still have the panels that are higher up. So as far as, echo in the room, you haven't changed any of that. I don't foresee this being a problem. I think you'll be perfectly fine with this.
And I can tell you for sure, a microfiber sofa is a fantastic sound absorber. I have one right to my left in this office, a little love seat. And if you take it out, the room sounds completely echoey. It soaks up some good stuff. Just a little story and comment here from Gurinder. He has 2 SVS PB-13 Ultra subs in his theater, and he had both of them at the back of his room. He decided to try moving one to the front of the room, and he was using Room EQ Wizard to measure oodles of bass sweeps to see how uniform he could get his bass response. I'm glad someone loves that procedure. He was doing this across several days. And on the last day, when everyone that knows him started to get concerned, with only 9 sweeps left to run, how many did he run? The PB13 Ultra that he had moved to the front of his room somehow died. Yeah. What? He got in touch with SVS. They went through some troubleshooting with him, but when that didn't solve the problem, they sent him a replacement amp. No hassle. How about that? The wrinkle? It's the new Sledge 1200 amplifier, since they don't have the identical Sledge 1000 for the 13 Ultra series anymore. That shouldn't necessitate doing all of his measurements over again, right? Please don't.
No, as long as you level match, you don't need to do all the measurements over again.
Yes, please do not.
No. Power is drawn, not pushed. Right. So that this has a little bit extra amplifier headroom in it now is not going to change the output of this subwoofer. So no, you're fine. But yeah, great to see. I mean, that's an older model at this point. It's not even a model they sell anymore. But they're still giving support. You know, I'm sure he's passed.
How nice of that. Yeah. See, that's the kind of service that makes you want to stick with somebody.
Yeah.
That's to me, that's brilliant. That's the way to handle a company. Clarence K. First up, Clarence just wanted to share that for anyone looking for velvet blackout drapes, IKEA's Sanela are some of the least expensive he could find that still offered nice quality, so he's been happy with those. He didn't say how much they were.
I think he said they were like $40 for whatever, like sort of like a pair of drapes.
A panel?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how wide, but in any case, he was looking around. He's like, hey, these are pretty inexpensive and pretty nice quality. So
I'm going to look at that because I'd like a couple of black velvet panels behind my editing television and speakers in front of me, because I think that would look good and absorb some more sound. Clarence says we helped walk him through putting together a great home theater that his whole family, 5 kids, gets to enjoy. 5 kids. Family movie night has become an important event, so he says thank you to us, and you are very welcome, Clarence.
Very welcome, Clarence, and happy to hear it.
That's sort of the point of the whole thing. When he was buying speakers, it was actually less expensive to buy 2 pairs of KEF Q100 bookshelf speakers than buying 1 pair plus the matching center. So he has 3 identical Q100 KEF speakers across the front and a spare just sitting around doing nothing. Could he make use of that unused speaker as a second center somehow? It's kind of bugging him that this lone speaker is serving no purpose at the moment. I get that. He's looked at the KEF center speaker options. If he got one, it would free up his Q100 center to be used with its partner in a different room, but the center models are still a bit pricey. What do we say? It depends on how pricey is too.
I can't in good conscience suggest buying anything here, because I'm like, you put it in a closet or in the garage or in the attic and kind of forget about it, and then you have a spare if one of the 3 that you're using ever develops a problem. You got a spare in hand without having to spend anything. If the real
hey, he has 5 kids,
right?
Something's going to happen to a speaker at some point.
So I mean, I find it really, because I mean the Q100s, it's the concentric speaker design that KEF uses, so it doesn't matter whether you lay it horizontally or stand it vertically. It's a wonderful choice as a center speaker. Very even dispersion in every direction from a KEF concentric design speaker, so it's a great choice as far as that goes. If the real goal is to be able to use a pair of them in a different room, inferring a little bit there that might be what he's really after. I mean, I don't know. There are people who have purchased KEF Q100 speakers out there. It's a discontinued model at this point. Maybe you just keep an eye on eBay and Craigslist and AudioGone and places like that. Maybe someone literally has a single that they're trying to get rid of, that type of thing. That would be like the only way I would approach this, because I don't think it makes any sense to spend extra to get a dedicated center, which honestly isn't any different. It's still a concentric design. It just that the logo was oriented horizontally instead of vertically. That's literally the only difference. So to me, it doesn't make sense to spend any money here. I'd maybe keep an eye on the used market. That's the most I would do, or I'd store this one away and forget about it until you need it, and then go, oh hey, wait a second, I had one. That's great. I don't have to buy anything.
I bet somebody somewhere out there, they probably had a lot of kids too, and somebody got one of these speakers destroyed.
Sure.
And they have one that they want to get rid of.
I know.
That the universe is waiting for you to look for that one speaker, I guarantee you. All right, moving on to Stefan from Belgium. Stefan's room is 13 feet wide by 24 feet long and 7 foot 3 inches high, with exposed joists that come down to 6 foot 8. He has solid core doors that close off the entrance hall and kitchen doorways at the front and back of his room, and there is a large opening on the left wall into the living room, but it can be closed off with a 440-pound metal and glass sliding door.
When we talk about if you're going to have a sliding door, it needs to be a nice beefy one that isn't going to rattle. I think that might cover it. 440 pounds.
440 pounds, yes.
Glass. Yeah.
That's metal and glass, yeah. As long as nothing is loose, it should be amazing. Sound isolation is not perfect. It never is. Some noise can make it upstairs, and there's a very small gap between the sliding door and the wall, so a little bit of sound can escape into the living room, but it doesn't rattle, which was my thought. So nothing is a major problem right now. He's using a 50-inch Panasonic plasma that he's feeling ready to upgrade. Do it. That's what I had. I had a 50-inch Panasonic plasma. I moved to the OLED 65-inch. Dude, just do it. But likely he's not going to do so until it dies. No, do it before then. You're going to have to trust me.
I mean,
that 50-inch Panasonic plasma is great, and I enjoyed it for a bunch of years, but
I guess over in Belgium, he almost certainly isn't getting the Vizio, unfortunately. That probably isn't going to be available in Europe whatsoever. But you know, like the B10, not crazy expensive anymore.
No, it's not. And we bought our OLED 65-inch LG for $2,000, and I think it's a screaming good deal at $2K. So he has a 7.2 speaker setup using all B&W XT series speakers with NHT Pro B20 subs, which have an external 250 watt per channel amp that sits in his equipment rack, and then two passive 10-inch sealed subwoofer cabinets that are connected with XLR cables. According to the specs, they are at -3 dB at 29 hertz. Most of the room's construction is brick and concrete, and half-inch electrical conduit has been cemented inside the walls. So changing the locations of where wires come out of the walls is really not an option. And using any wireless signals from his equipment rack to inside the room won't work, since it's 3 layers of brick that separate the rack in its custom enclosure. Wow. So he's ready for the apocalypse,
got bunker
man.
construction, yeah.
He's thinking he'd like a subwoofer upgrade. And since both of the 10-inch, I'm still laughing at the bunker construction, and since both of the 10-inch NHT units are on the front wall, he's interested in trying diagonally opposite corner placement too. But as mentioned, moving the wires that are embedded in concrete is not really an option, and much like his plasma, he finds it difficult to justify replacing them when they are still functioning perfectly well. Now that I agree with.
Sure.
Perfectly functioning subwoofers are not as much of a downgrade from a perfectly functioning
subs
plasma,
that no matter what you do can't dig down to 20 hertz. Doesn't matter what you do to them.
Well,
so
I guess it's a matter of opinion as to whether moving to an OLED from a plasma is a bigger jump than from moving from lesser subwoofers to better subwoofers. To me, the video is important. Size and looks are a concern, so he is strongly leaning towards SVS SB-3000 subwoofers. Good choice. He could eventually end up with 2 of them, but to start, could he stack the 2 NHT subs in the front corner and have a single SB-3000 in the rear corner? You could.
You could,
but then you've got
they
don't match very well performance-wise.
Yeah, from about 30 hertz on down, you're basically playing one sub. Now, I think the reasonable thing to do here is go ahead. I think the SB-3000, I mean, he's in about 2,300 cubic feet, roughly, because he can actually close off this room. You know, it doesn't have permanent openings. So, I mean, 2,300 cubic feet, you don't even really need an SB-3000. But if you really want to notice that you got a sub that is playing significantly lower at full reference versus what you have now, it's by no means a bad choice. You know, that. So let's see, SB-2000 Pro, it'd be a squiggly. It'd be almost there. The SB-3000 will definitely be there with some headroom to spare. So I think it's a pretty darn good choice, but I would probably advise you to just go ahead and try one, because you can still return an SVS even in Belgium, and just replace the NHT subs that you have.
So just move from the 2 NHTs to one SB-3000 for now.
That's what I would do. This to me is a replace, not add to situation, because you're gonna run into the whole issue of you're attempting to use the subs in diagonally opposite corners together from 30 hertz on up, but then only have the one of them playing from 30 hertz on down. Essentially, it leads into some, getting the levels matched for that to work, getting the uniformity to actually work in that scenario. It's all fairly challenging. So to me, I would just replace it. You already have wires that are run now. They are XLR cables, and you're right that there's only RCA inputs on the SB-3000. You could just use an XLR to RCA conversion cable, which will work just fine. So to me, that's what I would do here.
Right. So to run a cable from his rack to the rear corner location, it would end up being almost 60 feet long, and it would have to go inside half-inch electrical conduit. The SB-3000 only has RCA inputs, so can an RCA cable really be run that distance without any problems? Should he get a balanced to unbalanced converter instead so that he can run a balanced cable? You can run a 60-foot RCA cable.
Definitely.
It's not going to absorb bad juju from the air.
No, I mean,
get a decent quality
one that is properly shielded. That is all you have to worry about. You can absolutely run an RCA cable of 60 feet. Again, like when he says the half-inch conduit, I'm picturing sort of like that metal conduit, because this was burial. This was cemented in. So I'm picturing that metal conduit, which it's not always the case that you can pull the wire through that. It's more like you have to have it already there, and then you can embed that. So like at the front where I'm saying maybe just replace the NHTs that you have, I'm not sure if he would be able to actually extract the XLR cable that's there and just put an RCA instead. He might be able to, even if it's a self-termination, like you're just pulling through the coax cable and then terminating the RCA connection yourself. But that might be doable. But yeah, there's no reason why you have to run a balanced cable to the back of your room. You can run an RCA back there.
Just if there's a cable in there and you use it as a pull for another cable, pull a string through there as well. And leave the string
and
in there.
You can use just a little bit of dish soap as a lubricant if it's giving you any issues there. A little bit of dish soap is all you need.
And then it smells fantastic. It's just so nice.
It was a little funny because in his email, he called it a cinch cable. And I actually had to look that up. I'm like, cinch cable, it rings a bell, but I'm like, no, that's just what they call RCA cables in parts of Europe.
Oh, okay. All right, I did not know that. With the upgrade to the SB-3000, do we think he will still be okay on the soundproofing front? Will he be able to soundproof? Or does the added output in that very low end?
The extra 10 hertz extension. Tough to tell. If there happens to be something that resonates way down there, then that's the way you would notice it. Otherwise, it's not going to be largely different than what you have. It's only if there happens to be something that particularly rattles or resonates down in that lowest 10 hertz that you really aren't playing right now. It's not out of the realm of possibility. It's not typically what happens, though. Normally, our resonant frequencies are a little higher than that. So I wouldn't anticipate this being a large problem.
Right on. He is potentially interested in expanding to Atmos. With his lowered ceiling height and the exposed joist coming down even farther than that, is it even worth his while to try? Or does he have a room where it would do more harm than good? It never hurts to try. I think you could pull it off. You would need to be careful about the shape and placement of the speakers.
Given that this is an enclosed room and it is rectangular and you've got nice seating placement with good amount of space behind your seats, I don't say this is a room where it would be more harm than good. I think if you want to try it, I think you're a good candidate for it.
What are some speakers that would not hang down too far?
Well, that's the next question.
There we go. He's thinking he would still use in-ceiling speakers if he does Atmos, but he would install them by making his own backer boxes and then installing drywall in between his exposed ceiling joists so that there is somewhere to install the in-ceiling speakers. Does this seem like a good plan? And could he use KEF in-ceiling speakers with their minimum recommended backer box volume of 0.53 cubic feet? I wonder, though, is it worth making some ceiling in order to use in ceiling speakers.
Right. I don't think you should do any of that. What I think you should do is leave your exposed joists and use them to mount some satellite speakers.
Hey.
And B&W has M1 satellite speakers, which would nicely match the B&W speakers you're already using. And they do come in the box with a wall mount. They have a little stand so it can go on a desk, or a wall mount is also included in the box. That's what I would do. I would attach those to some of your joists, have them aiming down at you. You can swivel them and aim them however you like, and I would go with that for sure.
That sounds a lot easier, and it doesn't change the look dramatically. His equipment rack is already completely full as far as shelf space goes. He's using an Arcam AVR 850 to power his theater, which has 7 amps built in, but it can process 7.1.4, and it has height 1 and height 2 pre-outs. So if he does Atmos, he needs 4 channels of external amplification, but the amps would need to be physically small enough to go in the space behind some other components on an already filled rack shelf. He's mostly looked at Arcam and Parasound amps, but those seem like overkill for Atmos speakers, right? But any suggestions? Is there some mono price business we can get him into?
So, I mean, being that this is over in Belgium, I wasn't really sure where to look. I don't have a specific one that I'm going to point you to. If you have Audio Source available to you there, Audio Source provides some inexpensive, nice little 2-channel amps. They have both Class AB and Class D varieties, which are very small and don't produce a lot of heat. You don't need more than 50 watts a channel. You've got a low ceiling as it is. So for the M1 satellite speakers that I hope you'll use as your Atmos speakers if you do this, you don't need a ton of power at all. If Audio Source is not a brand that's widely available in Belgium, like any of those small little 50 watt per channel Class D amplifiers, which are, you know, compact, they're not even the full width or anything like that, will completely do this job for you. So that should be relatively easy to find. I couldn't find like an actual Amazon Belgium. But
is there just an Amazon EU?
No, there are individual countries over there. But yeah, that's the way I would point you. If you have Audio Source, I can vouch for that brand. If not, like any of the little 50 watt per channel Class D amps, you get a couple of those, it'll fit easily.
All right, yeah, don't overthink it. Do we feel strongly that any of his existing 7 speakers need to be repositioned? He knows it isn't ideal right now, but with the placement of doors and windows and the wire having been run inside the concrete walls, he didn't have a ton of other options. That's just life, man. Do we see anything that is so critically misplaced that it would be worth the large effort to move them?
No, in a word. I mean, I'm betting he's worried about his front speakers, which are in his front corners, but I'm looking at that. I'm like, it's the only place you can put it. You'd either have to put it right beside either side of your television, which is too close together, simply because of the door placement, or on the other side of the door, which means it's in the front left corner. What you could do if you haven't done already is have some absorption in your front corners so that you don't just have bare walls for the backs of your front speakers to be firing against. But other than that, I think that's fine. I think he's probably looking at his surrounds where his right surround is slightly in front of his left surround, again, because he has to clear the opening on the left-hand side with the sliding door and a window on the right-hand side, so he can't have them perfectly. That is no issue, what you're showing in
None
that
of
diagram.
that's ruining his experience.
No, you might have slightly different distance and trim level settings for your 2 surround speakers, but that's exactly why we're able to have slightly different distance and trim level settings, is to be able to equal that out. So I don't see anything hugely problematic.
It does seem like he's maximizing the situation. That's about as good as it gets. All right, so let's move on to a question from Dan W., or questions. Dan was trying to connect his setup so that he could feed Dolby Vision to his LG B6 OLED while feeding HDR10 from the same source through his receiver to an Epson 5050UB. He first tried a matrix switch, and initially it did send Dolby Vision through to his OLED with both displays physically plugged in, but as soon as he turned the Epson on for the first time, it dropped everything down to HDR10, and he couldn't get Dolby Vision back unless he unplugged the matrix switcher and started over. Yes. So he heard our advice to use an HDFury device instead. He bought the Integral 2 or Integral 2. How do they pronounce
I don't know.
I'm going to say Integral
That's what I
2,
say.
because I like math, which lists Dolby Vision support and options to set the ED-ID to one output with Dolby Vision and the second output without Dolby Vision. But the same thing happened. Both displays ended up getting HDR10 only. Then he realized he could set the ED-ID for both outputs on the HDFury Integral 2 to Dolby Vision, but it could convert one of those outputs to HDR10. That seemed to work, and least as far
that should
as
be
getting
at
a
least
working...
as far. Typo, my fault.
That's okay. I can plow right on through. At least as far as getting a working signal to his OLED in Dolby Vision and to his Epson at the same time. But the Epson's image doesn't look right. Okay.
Yeah.
Can we help sort this out for him at all?
So
That's a little weird.
HDFury.
He's on the right track, though.
Yeah, you're on the right track. HDFury has a whole write-up about this, getting a Dolby Vision signal to an HDR10 only type of display, which is what you want to do. Your source device has to be able to send out Dolby Vision. It can only send out one signal. It has to be a Dolby Vision signal. So setting an HDFury so that one output is Dolby Vision and the output is HDR10 isn't going to work because it has to go lowest common denominator. When it says the ED-ID of one of the displays is HDR10 only, then that's what it's going to default down to. So you have to say that both displays can take Dolby Vision, but of course the Epson can't, so then you have to use the HDFury device to convert it from Dolby Vision to HDR10. So that is the correct setup as far as that goes. But in the write-up that HDFury did, they point out that, so this is an unfortunate thing, the Integral 2 can do Dolby Vision to HDR10 conversion, but with whatever the signaling thing is, flag or however this is working,
metadata,
it won't send out the flag necessary to kick a display into HDR10 mode. It will only work with the type of display where you can manually force the display into HDR10 mode, and you would have to manually do that. So some of the JVC projectors have that option, and some other like professional monitors have that option. You can force them into HDR10 picture mode, but that's the way it would work with the Integral 2. So unfortunately, you need to upgrade your HDFury device to the Vertex 2. The Vertex 2 will, in addition to converting the Dolby Vision to HDR10, also send out the flag that will kick your Epson into HDR10 mode when it does all of that. Now, a further step is that you need to create the profile in the HDFury Vertex 2 for your Epson so that it converts the Dolby Vision information into an HDR10 tone map that will work nicely specifically with your Epson. But they've actually put links in the HDFury article about how all this works to the people who have worked, and the Epson 5050 is absolutely one of the models that has been profiled. So you can find all the info that you need, but unfortunately it's just slightly the wrong HDFury device, which you can't be blamed on because it does say, hey, yeah, we can do Dolby Vision to HDR10 conversion, which it technically can, just not everything that you need it to do.
Not the way
to
he needs
also
it
kick
done.
the Epson into HDR picture mode.
So he needs the Vertex?
He needs the Vertex 2. The Diva will also do it, but that's more expensive, and you don't have to use the Diva. You can use the Vertex 2.
All right. That's not a bad situation.
Yeah,
then.
I
That's
mean, he
not
just
hard to
got it,
fix.
so it's an exchange, but it costs a little bit more. That's the downside.
Right. So Kris B has some questions. Is it possible to extend an existing speaker wire by just adding some more, or do you have to rewire so that it's a single solid run? I've added cable and nothing bad happened.
You can totally add extra cable to it. Now, the proper way to do it is a butt splice. That's the proper way to do things, which is literally just a little piece of metal where you crimp both sides. So you put the leads in from the existing wire to the extension wire, and then you crimp it down, and then there's a little bit of shrink wrap tubing, which you just blow a hair dryer on if you don't have a shrink wrap tubing heat gun. And yeah, that closes everything down properly and totally fine.
Or if you're like me, you just twist two wires together nice and tight and put some electrical tape around it real good and go, boom, I'm done.
Technically correct way to do it, so I'll say butt splice since they cost pennies. You run down to Home Depot and grab yourself a butt splice.
Yes, I did intend to do that prettier with some butt splices, but they
have various sizes, so get the gauge that you need. Usually they're 16 and 14 gauge combined and 12 and 10 gauge combined. So depending on the gauge of your speaker wire, get the correct gauge of butt splice.
I did use a butt splice when it was electricity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
So you'll be happy to know I didn't fool around when it was 120 volts. Moving on. Do we have a suggestion for an outdoor Bluetooth speaker with good sound quality and good battery life? I mean, that depends on budget and your definition of good sound quality and good battery life and what situation you're using it is. But yes, there are definitely good Bluetooth speakers.
I don't know what his budget is, but I'll just mention the Sonos Move, which is a fairly recent addition to the Sonos lineup. Really good speaker. So, of course, it does take Bluetooth, which is what I wanted. It's rechargeable, waterproof, weatherproof, $400, though. So I don't know if that's how much you want to spend. And then, of course, you can attach it to a Sonos setup. So who knows? It might be the beginning of a Sonos setup for you. But I can recommend that one, the Sonos Move. If you want to spend less, in fact, half as much. So for $200, Ultimate Ears with their UE Boom series, but specifically the Mega Boom 3. That's the one that's got 20-hour battery life, better sound quality because it's just physically larger. And yeah, $200 for that thing is a pretty decent deal for the sound quality and the durability. You can actually like throw it in the pool. It's that waterproof. So yeah,
there you go.
The UE Mega Boom 3. I like that one.
Yeah, I just like the classy name, Mega Boom. Alex Y has questions. Alex took our advice for his townhouse setup. Hey, instead of starting with a pair of Ascend Sierra 2 fronts and a pair of Sierra Luna surrounds with no subwoofer, he will start with the Sierra 2 fronts and an SVS PC-2000 Pro sub and wait on the Sierra Luna surrounds. There we go. We talked him into it. We talked him into it. I think he's going to be happy. He actually has a pair of old KLH speakers with keyhole mounts that were like $5 used, so he can use those to experiment with surround speaker placement and mounting and give surround sound to go that way. Seems good, right? Why not?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes, of course.
At worst, you end up not using them, so...
yeah, this is a zero-risk situation. You can only gain, and it might be fantastic. You might enjoy it for a while. So once his new toys arrive and he gets them hooked up, what should he play first to test out his system? Any specific movies we like to use? Man, there's so many. It kind of depends on what you're into.
We'll try to think of like 2 or 3 for your side. I'll go ahead and say I definitely throw in, I mean, it's not the greatest movie in the series, but Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. As far as an audio demonstration, I mean, the opening tells you a whole lot because there's that crazy space battle going on with some really nice bass that goes on in there, and then it's a cacophony of sound, which if you can pick out individual sounds, tells you a lot. So I love that as a quick early demo. I like the opening of The Dark Knight Rises a whole lot. It has some subtle bass at the beginning, which is super nice to hear that your PC 2000 Pro is going to reveal to you in a way that you've likely never heard at home before. And it's not like, well, there is bombastic bass later on in the opening of The Dark Knight Rises, but at the beginning, there's some subtle bass, so you get a good taste of both. A recent one that's like, you know, it's Roland Emmerich, so you know you're going to get some crazy sound in there. Midway. Midway's a pretty darn good demo disc, if you want to throw that on there. So yeah, I'll say those as well.
You know, when we did the SVS review episode with me, I mentioned Interstellar.
Oh, yes.
Especially like the going into the wormhole scenes and the synthesizer music they have in there. And of course, you got to watch the Apollo 11 documentary where they found the 70 millimeter footage, and it looks so beautiful, and the launch sequence. Just let the Apollo 11 spacecraft Saturn V rocket launch in your living room. That's fun. So anyway, yeah, there's just so much out there. Manuel T has questions. Manuel just got a pair of Ascend Sierra 2 speakers. He has them sitting on top of his TV stand. What should he put under the speakers for damping? And should he pull them all the way forward to the front edge of the stand? He isn't used to speakers looking that way, but it makes a big difference to sound. If it makes a big difference to the sound, he'll do it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to isolate. Do you have a mouse pad?
Yeah, mouse pads could do it. Museum putty could do it if you want. Purpose made. I mentioned previously in this episode the SM pads, which, yeah, they're $24 for a pair of them. It's actually 8 pieces of foam that you get in all, because it's each pair of the monitor pads are in 2 pieces, and then each of those pieces is actually like two wedges so that you can make it a
Right.
4-degree incline or decline, flat, or an 8-degree incline or decline. So you have all of those options available to you. I mean, I really like them because they're pieces of foam. These ones are not crazy although I guess $24 for some pieces of foam is actually overpriced, but you know, all things considered compared to the like $60 that Orlex want to charge now for the mopeds, $24 isn't
Yeah,
too
that's a
bad.
lot.
And yeah, purpose made for this exact
I assume
scenario.
they're a little bit rubbery and not slippery.
I wouldn't call them rubbery, but they are definitely non-slip because it's like a textured foam. So yeah, your
Okay.
speakers aren't going to move on that.
Right. We've mentioned the importance of Audyssey microphone placement and how there shouldn't be obstructions between the mic and all the speakers. So should he literally move his couch out of the way, or should he use the included cardboard microphone holder and stand it directly on each couch seat or something else? What's the best way? I'll tell you what I've done is put the mic on a tripod
Yes.
and get the tripod at your head level and do that across a couch. And then if you really want to get fancy and you like to lay down on the couch like I do, you could put it down where your head is when you lay down, but put it on a tripod at the height of your
And
ears.
if you don't already have one, just the camera adapter for a tripod is the size of screw that will go into the bottom of an Audyssey microphone. Is the smaller
Right.
screw size, not like the microphone screw size for like a mic clip. That's the larger screw
Right.
size. So yeah, you can get a little camera adapter that will plug into the bottom of the Audyssey microphone. I do like to use a tripod with a boom arm. It's that much easier to position the mic exactly where you want it versus just a vertical tripod. But no, you don't need to move the couch out of the way. But what we're trying to do, if we always say, Tom and I always say, picture a 1-foot bubble of unobstructed air all around the Audyssey microphone. As long as you have that, you should be getting pretty good results because that means you're not right up against the backrest. It is not sitting literally on the backrest, which plenty of people do that, but that is not giving you
don't do
enough.
that.
Picture a 1-foot bubble of air around the Audyssey microphone. And yeah, you should more or less have a clear line of sight from any tweeter of any speaker to that microphone. There shouldn't be an actual obstruction between the tweeter and the head of the microphone there. Microphone should be pointed straight up. It's an omnidirectional mic. It shouldn't be aiming forward or toward a speaker or anything as you do that. But yeah, that's basically all you really need to do. And Audyssey is doing a better job these days of describing, if you follow the setup wizard, to not move the microphone crazy distances. Keep it within like 2 feet of the initial measurement position number 1. And that's pretty much all you need to do.
Because you want it to take the couch into account.
A little bit, but not to the point, like some people are like, I'll be sitting there. Shouldn't I be sitting there while the microphone is there so it takes my body
that's
into
going a bit
account?
much.
No, we don't need that, but we want clear line of sight. We do want the acoustics of the couch taken into account. But yeah, that 1-foot bubble of air.
Sorry, I just like the idea of getting one of those GoPro head straps and putting the mic on top of your head. So it's perfect. I'm always sitting right here. It'll take me into account. Joe P. Joe. At the moment, Joe's gear is all plugged into a 15-amp electrical outlet that is on a circuit that is shared with some lights. He was thinking of having a new circuit run that would be dedicated to his home theater gear. He's often heard that running a 20-amp circuit for home theater gear is a good idea, but he'll be using an APC J35 battery backup for power protection, and it's only rated for 15 amps. So, any benefit to running a 20-amp line? And if he does, will it be okay to plug the J35 into it? There's no particular reason to run a 20-amp line in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, typically it's done when people are talking about really, really high power amplifiers. I mean, that's pretty much exclusively where it's talked about. Sometimes they apply that to a subwoofer, but I mean, these days the subwoofer amplifiers are so efficient that even that isn't really necessary. So it's really like the crazy high wattage draw amplifiers. And I mean, hey, we've got amplifiers that have like 11 channels all built into one chassis now. So that's sort of where it can apply. But yeah, you don't really need to do this. If you run a dedicated 15 amp circuit, which is powering your home theater gear and nothing else, that's going to be totally fine. You don't need a 20 amp for that.
Really great.
Now, if you did run a 20 amp line. The J35 can plug into it. Power is drawn, not pushed. So having the ability to send even more current through the wiring in your wall is not a big problem. But yeah, there isn't really a huge incentive to do this. Just run a normal 15 amp line. Any electrician can certainly do that. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, my house is 1960. I don't even have grounded outlets where I'm plugging stuff in. And I have fuses for some rooms and breakers for other rooms because they added some stuff. Anyway, don't overthink that unless you have an obvious problem of interference. Moving along to Stephen M. in Newcastle, Australia. Stephen got new Martin Logan Motion Series surround and back speakers to replace the Jamo speakers he was using. Oh, is that Yamo? It's Yamo.
Yep.
Okay.
With a J.
The Yamo speakers he was using, and to match the Martin Logan Motion Series front speakers that he already had. That meant redoing his speaker setup with his Yamaha receiver. When he checked the speaker levels manually with an SPL meter, they measured the same, but to his ears, the speakers on the left side of his setup sounded quieter, and he ended up manually increasing their trim levels, only 1 decibel each. Okay. Any idea why it would measure as perfectly even but not sound that way to his ears? Your ears may be off by a decibel.
He asks that.
My ears are probably off by a decibel. I used to mix live band music, so I can't trust that one side's perfect and the other side isn't. Anyway, he does have more space on the left side of the room, plus an opening to the kitchen. Is that the reason? Or does he maybe have slightly better hearing in his right ear than his left? Any of that can happen. And if you only adjusted at 1 decibel,
yeah, that's
not much.
Questionable as it is, because that is by definition the least amount that people can reasonably reliably detect is a 1 decibel difference.
Right. And I'll tell you, don't discount the fact that your perception is affected by knowing that there's an opening over there.
There's a little bit of that,
and knowing how the room should sound. It does. It makes a difference. And certainly if you only adjusted at 1 decibel, it could be a combination of all these
That's
things.
like within margin of error for sure. So, I mean, it'd be different if you were like, hey, where it automatically set the trim level, I had to increase it 9 decibels for it to sound right. Then I'd be like, oh, something happened there. But 1 decibel, like it's so within the margin of error. It could be entirely psychoacoustic, exactly like Lee says, just because you are aware that you have greater space over to the left-hand side. It could be that you have that little bit of extra space. I mean, he's using these, I don't know if they're bipole or dipole, but regardless, they're the type of surround speaker that is, the angled shape and firing sound off. So there's a slightly, less reflection off the left side than there is on the right side. That is objectively true with the greater distance and the opening there, but it's also questionable that I don't think there's any issue here. And the microphone having the microphone is really only paying to the direct sound, so that could be part of it. Your brain is paying attention to both direct and reflected sound, and like I say, objectively there is a little bit weaker reflection on the left side than the right side. So if you really want to say it, I'll chalk it up to that, but I think you're just within margin of error.
Within margin of error. I told you about how my brain insists that the bass in my room is louder off to the right because I can see,
a subwoofer
that
on that
subwoofer.
side.
Right. There's another one behind me to my left, but I swear I just know where the bass is coming. It's like, I feel it in my right leg more than my left leg. No, I don't, but there it is. And so don't discount that humans are weird. His surrounds and backs are mounted up high, only about 18 inches from the ceiling. That allows them to go above windows and doorways, so lowering them isn't really an option. With them all mounted that high, is there any point in adding Atmos speakers? Now, maybe the top middles.
Yeah. I'm not going to say there's absolutely nothing, because they are around the perimeter of your room. Having something that's firing straight down directly overhead might give you a slightly different experience. You're fair, quite close to the back wall of your room anyway, so it would be top middles that you'd be installing, not top rears. But this whole room setup, this is pretty clearly a living space that he's in. It's not just like a dedicated theater. There's, quite a few reflective surfaces that are going on in here. It's really questionable to me if Atmos would be, you know, a huge benefit to you in here.
Right.
I'm very wishy-washy on it, which means that Tom would be telling you absolutely no. Yeah, I can't get gung-ho about it. I wouldn't stop you from doing it. I would definitely have top middles be as the thing that you try first and foremost, but I'm by no means gung-ho about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't go out of my way. If it's just something you find fun, go for it and try it. But I'm probably on the Tom side of this.
Okay.
Not really gonna change your life. So let's maybe do Ken's question.
Infinite Gary's is the very last, right after Ken's, but Ken's is long.
Okay, we'll see how quickly
Ken's
this
is
goes.
long, and so is Gary's.
Yes, Ken has a lot of information in this, so we'll see where we get. But I'm thinking we might need to move on after Ken. We'll see. Ken S. Ken has an unfinished room in his basement. Once the framing is complete, the internal dimensions of the room should be 13 feet wide by 20 feet long by 8 feet high, although there will be a soffit to go around the ductwork. He will have doors on the left side and back, so it will be an enclosed rectangle other than the soffit, and his gear will go in the space under the stairs. Okay. The upcoming Xbox Series X is an important part of his plans, and he wants the maximum visual experience it can offer: HDR, 4K 120, variable refresh rate, so he is planning on an 85-inch LCD instead of a projector. The Sony X900H is what he has in mind, along with the new Denon X3700H for its HDMI 2.1 pass-through, and he's planning to wire for a 7.2.4 speaker configuration. Okay. He has it in mind that he would like 3 rows of seating. What should the spacing be? How close can the front row be to his 85-inch TV? Oh, you can scooch on up there 6 feet away if you want to.
You could. Now, 85 inches, I would suggest being eyes to screen 7.5 feet. Which, if you are wall mounting the TV, would basically put your front seat like 8 feet from the front wall, from the physical front wall, because there's some depth to the television. I'll say the X900H, which I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is a very nice choice, but we don't know that Vizio P Quantum X might even give it a run for its money for about the same price or slightly less, but it's got more dimming zones and it gets brighter. So anyway, possibly to consider. He hasn't purchasing it today.
All right.
But yeah, let's see. 20,
like if he were spacing out 3 rows,
yeah,
to fit a lot of people in here
20
at once.
feet long, I'm not super enthusiastic about doing 3 permanent rows of seating here. What I would suggest, 20 feet long with an 85-inch screen up front, and you sitting 8 feet from the front wall, 7.5 feet from the TV in your front row, which actually, given the layout of his room, looks like it's going to work real nice, because where the front left wall comes back to the doorway is 8.5 feet from the front wall, so it gives you a space to put your left surround speaker just in front of the doorway. So that works out really nicely. But I could comfortably have a second row of seats on a riser that's 6 feet behind the front row, which does technically leave you maybe 6 feet behind that second row, but
it starts getting tight.
You know, you're going to want to have some acoustic treatment on the back wall, so I can't picture having another row of recliners, a third row of recliners that's pushed right against the back wall and doesn't leave you room for acoustic treatments. What I would maybe suggest is, how often do you really need 3 rows of seats in here? I'm betting it's not that often. If and when you do, you bring in some bar stools that go behind the second row. That's what I would really suggest. I can see having 2 rows of seats in here all the time, but if you ever need a third row, just bring in some bar stools, have a riser for that back row that goes all the way back to the back wall, bar stools behind the second row on that will be totally fine. That's what I would recommend here. I just can't picture you're actually going to need 3 rows of seats all the time.
Yeah, that would really, really fill that room. That seems like way too much.
I wouldn't really recommend it.
So what should be the height of the risers for the middle row and back row? And we're saying only a back row.
So go ahead and have a riser for the permanent back row of seats, and just extend that at the same height all the way to the back wall. Typically, it's going to be between 8 and 12 inches. It depends a little bit. Now, given that you're going for a flat panel, you have the option of mounting it a little bit higher on the wall so that it's easier to have that sight line. So you could have like a standard step is 7.5 inches. Over that,
Yeah.
you're technically supposed to have a little step and another step. 7.5 inches is like by code how high a single step should be. So you could do 7.5 inches and then just mount the flat panel a little bit higher on the front wall so that the back row has a nice sight line. And like I say, the third row should just be bar stools on that same riser.
I feel exactly the same way. How should he position his surround and back speakers? How high should they be considering his seating plan?
Yeah, so he was mentioning he might have them about 2 feet above seated ear height, which would be fine. I mean, again, my only consideration is the tweeters should have a clear line of sights to all of the seats that you care about. So that's typically going to be with the tweeter about 1.5 to 2 feet above seated ear height. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, he didn't mention this in the email, I'm going to suggest to you having 2 pairs of side surround speakers if you really do think you're going to be using that second row quite a bit. You know, have a pair of, I wouldn't have a third pair of side surround speakers for the occasional, I wouldn't do that, but 2 pairs of side surround speakers. And again, looking at his layout, that should work really nicely because you'll have one just to, you know, if you're coming in through the entrance, it'll be just to the left of that entrance, will be perfectly in line with your front row, and just to the right of the entrance will be in line with the second row. So I would just have that second one 7.5 inches taller than the first one so that it's right in line with that row seats, and I'm not worried about the occasional third row. Yeah,
no. Forget those people. Make them sit up front in beanbags and kick them in the back of the head. It doesn't matter. Since the Denon X3700H can power 9 speakers, which inexpensive 2-channel amp do we recommend so he can expand to 11 speakers?
Yeah, I'm going to point you to Audio Source. I mentioned them before in this podcast. Their Amp 100. It's $140 now. Used to be $100 way back when, but, you know, prices go up with inflation. But yeah, the Amp 100 from Audio Source, $140. Perfect.
There you go. He's aiming to keep the price for all the speakers and subs reasonably low, maybe about $1,000 for the 7 main speakers. He wants bookshelf speakers up front, not towers, and he's considering the Polk Signature series. Do we have thoughts? Ascend Acoustic thoughts?
Yeah, I this situation, I want you to get some Ascend Acoustics. In fact, I want you to get, if you can go a little bit above $1,000, for $1,000, you can get 7 identical HTM 200 SE speakers from Ascend Acoustics, which in this setup, which is not super wide, and you're going to want to have speakers that can mount on the wall, the HTM 200 SE is their sealed speaker design, but it can play loud. It can take 300 watts if you want it to, and this is not a gigantic room. You don't need all of that. So it's even though it's their smallest speaker, please don't think that it's somehow a tiny little satellite that can't play loud. No. 7 identical of them, even including the shipping, is under $1,000. Like I say, ideally, I'd like you to have another pair of side surrounds for that second row. So 9 of them gets you up to about $1,200. They give you a big discount buying bundles of HTM 200 SEs. So I say go ahead and try to get 9 of those if you can stretch your budget just a little.
That actually sounds like a really good idea. Then you know you've got all the timbre matching.
It'd be delightful. Would that sound good?
The look of it is all very consistent. Yeah. For in-ceiling Atmos speakers, he was thinking the Monoprice Alpha series with their metal back cans, but they seem like they're meant for a drop tile ceiling. Would they work for a normal drywall ceiling? And will the metal back cans prevent too much sound from leaking upstairs? He has limitations on where in-ceiling speakers can go since there are pipes and ducts in the ceiling at certain locations. And again, that's just
I feel quite strongly that you should not do in-ceiling speakers at all. Partly because you can't position them exactly where you want to, but also because he's going to have a soffit for sure on the left-hand side of his room to go around the existing ductwork and pipes. I think you should put in a matching appearance soffit on the right-hand side so that it looks symmetrical, and it gives you a great place to put some puck lights along the 2 sides without affecting your soundproofing, because you can have a solid ceiling that goes above the soffit, and then you just have the soffit there, which, you know, it hasn't affected the soundproofing, and you can put your little puck lights in there along the sides, 2 strips. And instead of in-ceiling speakers even in the soffits, because that would be right against your side walls, just to the inside of the soffits. So just on the inside where the soffits meet the ceiling.
And aiming down.
Get some Boston Acoustics Soundware 4.5 wall mountable speakers. because then you aren't putting any holes in your ceiling. Sound quality wise, they're a pretty darn nice match for the Ascends. And I'm just like, it's less expensive. It's way less hassle. It means no holes in your ceiling. And the look is going to be fantastic. So I feel strongly about that.
That actually makes a whole lot of sense. What's the least expensive pair of subwoofers we would recommend for this 2,100 cubic foot space? Now, first of all, are we certain he should start with 2? Would it be better to buy a bit more expensive?
I mean, he wants 2 rows of seats. This is an enclosed rectangle. I'm like, let's get the pair.
So better to go ahead.
I think so. And
so,
look, don't skimp out. You're just going to wish you hadn't skimped. I'm talking about going $100 more to get the pair that I really want you to get. So the the absolute cheapest I recommend is RSL's Speedwoofer 10S. He asked what's the absolute cheapest. That's the absolute cheapest that I recommend, but those are 25 hertz subs. For $100 more, and this is like with the pair because there's a discount when you get 2 of them, a pair of PB1000s from SVS, or a pair of Monoprice's Monolith 10-inch ported model, which is like identical to the PB1000 in output and cost. So either of those, if you have a preference for the way one of them looks over the other, but just spend a little bit extra, the $100 extra. Because $100 you will regret if you don't spend that. Now you're genuinely right down to 20 hertz. There's no questions to be asked, and just do it. It's so worth it.
There you go. See, I always brag on how we save people money, but honestly, there comes times where that extra $100 or $200 makes all the difference, and you bump up into a better category.
It's just worth it, and that's the advice I want to get. You know, when it's worth it, then let's do it.
And it's worth it in that situation. He's going to need a 25-foot HDMI cable. And since he wants the full 4K 120 capabilities of the Xbox Series X, it needs to be an ultra high speed HDMI cable, right? Is the only option fiber optic? I think you could get a 25-foot cable. HDMI, can you not?
You can if it's HDMI 2.0 with 18 gigabits per second bandwidth, but for 4K 120 with the full, I mean, you don't have to have 48 gigabits, but 40 gigabits bandwidth to get that length at the moment. Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we still don't have any actually certified ultra high speed HDMI cables yet. But Monoprice is selling ones that they've measured that can pass 48 gigabits per second and will probably be certified at some point. I'm not like super against buying them, but yeah, to get 25 feet, it would have to be the fiber optic version. The longest one they have is 8 feet. That isn't the fiber optic.
I hate HDMI so
crazy,
bad. We didn't need it as a standard. It's just the dumbest.
These crazy bandwidths that we're getting to, but I did want to mention, I mean, going back to, what Mike was talking about, having gone through this, having all of his equipment outside of the room and saying, like, having done it now, Andrew saying this too, he's like, I'd put the equipment in the room. Now, the space under the stairs is not drastically far away, but it's still necessitating a 25-foot run. I'm like, could you, because you're going to have a TV up front, you're going to have your center speaker up front, could you have a TV stand at the front of your room that holds your equipment, and now you can just run an HDMI cable from your AV receiver at the front of your room to your TV that is mounted on the wall at the front of your room?
I'm telling you, he needs to really, really think about that.
Yeah.
And really ponder that and picture that, and
because like you're talking about
draw a picture of it.
It's a $200 fiber optic cable to do this, and I'm like, you're trying to save money everywhere else. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, think about integrating the electronics into the look of the room and have it right there in front of everything and make it pretty. So yeah, since we're not cooking dinner tonight, we're going to go get some takeout. I will go ahead and do Infinite Gary's 900 questions that follow.
Let's rapid fire these. I should be able to rapid fire them. Hooray.
That's right. Wait, someone on Twitter was talking about the 2-hour club.
Oh, yes.
The AVRant 2-hour club. That's the people that listen all the way to the end. Was
the 2-hour plus club now. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's right. It's people who listen all the way to the end, every single word we speak. And I know Infinite Gary has to be one of those. So Infinite Gary asks, what is up with the LFE versus LFE plus main setting for your subwoofer output? Recommendations vary. Toggling it back and forth does seem to make a difference sometimes, particularly when switching between surround sound and stereo, so it's confusing. Can we sort it out? and how do the various auto setup programs handle it? Now, isn't LFE plus main where they're sending bass full range to the front speakers as well?
The little bit unfortunate thing about this is that different AV receiver brands seem to handle this slightly differently from brand to brand.
Right.
The way it's supposed to be, and the way that Denon and Marantz do it, and that's why we like to rely on them. Yamaha does it this way too, although Yamaha has some weird things with how you can set your subwoofer, the two subwoofer outputs, which just avoid it by using only one of those. But everything else is that it's supposed to be, if you have set all your speakers to small, then you should just have the subwoofer output set to LFE only, because it will take the low frequency effects channel that will be sent to only the subwoofer. Great. And then the bass that has been managed from all of the speakers that are set to small, which should be all of your speakers, will get rerouted to your subwoofer output with the subwoofer output set to LFE only. That's how it's supposed to be. The LFE plus main is only supposed to come into play when you have your front, left, right speakers set to large. At that point, normally if there's a full range signal in just the front left speaker or just the front right speaker, none of that bass will get rerouted to the subwoofer output. But if you set it to LFE plus main, it will actually not reroute, but duplicate some of the bass that is in your large front speakers out of the subwoofer output. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to...
Yeah, I think my Yamaha calls that extra bass or something.
And some call it double bass. Onkyo used to have it labeled as double bass. So it's supposed to be a duplication. Now, unfortunately, there are some AV receiver brands that treat it a little bit differently, where even if all of your speakers are set to small, if you choose the LFE plus main setting, it will actually duplicate some of the subwoofer's bass and put it into your front speakers, even though they're set to small, which isn't supposed to happen.
Okay, that's very
not
wrong.
how it's supposed to work, but I know that happens with some models where it just treats the front speakers as though they're large no matter what you've set them to when you choose LFE plus main. So the safe setting always is all of your speakers are set to small and the subwoofer is set to LFE only.
Right, and I understand the desire of some people to, I have huge front, left, right speakers. They're large, and the amplifier thinks it's large. Don't fall for it.
Stereo listing mode thing, that's where Denon and Marantz is in the flagships. They have a separate setting for the stereo-only listing mode. Just set it to basic, because then you don't have different settings between stereo listing mode and all the surround sound listing modes. Don't worry about it. Don't make a separate setting. Leave it alone.
Right. In Gary's bedroom Atmos setup, because of course Gary has a bedroom Atmos setup, he has a 7.1.4 configuration with upward firing Atmos modules. Now see, this is nice. Atmos in a bedroom, you're laying down on a bed and the Atmos sound hits you right directly in the face because you're just laying there on a pillow looking up. He wanted to try having those Atmos modules set as height speakers versus having them set as Dolby speakers to find out if he could actually hear a difference. But when he manually toggled those settings in his Marantz SR6011 receiver, they went completely silent. Can we explain? Gary likes to try a lot of stuff.
Yes. The issue here is that he had run Audyssey. So when you change the amplifier assign manually, this could have been saying I have surround back speakers versus I don't have surround back speakers. That would be a new amplifier assign. When you do that, you have to rerun Audyssey in order for it to work. You could just turn Audyssey off. Then you could go ahead and toggle back and forth between different amplifier assigns and have it make sound. But if Audyssey is on and you change the amplifier assign in some way, it just won't output sound from the speakers that weren't there during the Audyssey setup.
I gotcha. So if it didn't measure it before,
it'll just be like, hey, I didn't measure these, so I'm just going to not play anything. So yeah, the easy thing for him to do, instead of like running Audyssey twice and doing a whole save and load thing back and forth, the easy thing would be to just turn Audyssey off for this trial. That would be the way to do this.
There you go. In that same bedroom setup, he has a 5-channel Emotiva amp, which he is using to power the front, center, and surrounds. That leaves the Marantz powering the backs and 4 Atmos speakers. But the pre-out setting in the Marantz only lets him select either his fronts or his rear heights for pre-out duty. there's no way to make it show that he is using all 5 pre-outs. Is that just a menu design flaw?
Well, it's not it's not so much a flaw as it is. I don't blame anybody for being a little bit confused by this because the wording isn't super clear. So in that sense, it's a design flaw. But all that's going on here, we've covered this before, but it bears repeating, is that when you are trying to run an 11 speaker setup from an AV receiver that has 9 amplifiers built in, it will say, okay, 2 of your 11 speakers have to be powered externally. I only have 9 amplifiers, so 2 of them have to be externally powered. Which 2 are being powered externally? And in the case of Denon and Marantz, they only give you 2 choices. Either my front, left, and right speakers are being powered externally, or my rearmost Atmos speakers, whatever those might be. It might be top middles, or it might be top, you know, whatever you've labeled it. But the rearmost Atmos speakers, those are the ones being powered externally. That's all it's really asking you. You know, 2 of them have to be external. Which 2 are those? But then...
So they basically said the most important speakers or the least
pretty
important
much,
speakers.
Yeah.
Right, I got
But those are the only options they give you. But all of the other 9 speakers can be powered externally because the pre-outs for all the other 9 speakers are always active. So you have the option of powering all the other 9 speakers internally or externally. You don't have to tell the receiver that. It's just an available option no matter what's going on. But all you're doing with that pre-out assign is saying the 2 speakers that have to be powered externally, because the receiver only has 9 amplifiers built in.
Gotcha. The ohm setting for the speaker outputs. The manual, and I've dealt with this too, the manual very clearly says that you should select either the 6 ohm or 4 ohm setting instead of the default 8 ohm setting if your speakers are specified as 6 ohm or 4 ohm nominal. But Gene over at Audioholic says to always leave it at 8 ohms. So what is the audible impact either way?
If you set it to anything other than 8 ohms, you lose a whole bunch of headroom. It's a safe...
It's more likely to shut off like it did to me one time.
It's a safety setting where it basically just truncates a whole bunch of power that you could have, saying that, okay, if you actually have 4 ohm speakers, then I'm only going to allow this much wattage through, and I'm gonna cut it off at that point. So it is a safety setting. In the cover are behind's legal sense, I guess you should follow it. But Gene is absolutely right that all it really does is curtail a whole bunch of available headroom, and there's not a really good reason to do it. Leave it at 8 ohms all the time.
Right, and that's what I have done on the latest
Except
receiver.
legally speaking, don't. There, I've covered my behind.
Right. Technically make it right, but you don't have to. Rob always says to leave the LPF or LFE setting at the default of 120 hertz, and that he doesn't understand why there is even an option to change it. Why? What does that setting actually do anyway? What is it with that low pass filter?
So LPF stands for low pass filter for LFE, low frequency effects channel, and it only applies to the dedicated low frequency effects channel. If you're listening to 2-channel analog that has no low frequency effects channel in it, this setting does absolutely nothing. It is only for the 0.1 in a 5.1 or 7.1 signal, the actual low frequency effects channel. And that channel contains sounds from below 20 hertz up to 120 hertz. So I don't know why you would ever change that setting. All this setting can do is prevent bass that is in the dedicated low-frequency effects channel from being played. That's all it can do. And it's at the high end of the... It makes no sense why it's even an option. That's why I don't understand why that setting is even there.
It probably became part of some hardwired chip a long time ago. Some engineer stuck it in there and nobody's taking it out.
I mean, I guess maybe somebody had a really crappy subwoofer that was just making noises above a given frequency, and they're like, well, we can filter that up. But it's just the weird, I don't know why it's there. But yeah, it only applies to the dedicated low-frequency effects channel, nothing else.
So it's the take some sound out of my effects channel setting. I don't understand that either. Audyssey LFC, low frequency containment. The description in the manual makes it seem impressive, saying it can prevent low frequencies from disturbing neighbors while applying psychoacoustic processing to restore the perception of low bass for the listener. Does it really work? is that psychoacoustic processing something that would be a benefit even if you don't have neighbors to worry about? Do any other brands offer this? I can't imagine that being a benefit, especially if you have no one to bother.
Audyssey low frequency containment, LFC, has been measured, and what it is a high pass filter. Nothing more. That's all it is a high pass filter. You choose how much you want to roll off the bass, but that's all it is. It's filtering off the bass, nothing more. There's no special psychoacoustic stuff and all that, the marketing BS. It's been measured.
Wow.
All it does is roll off your bass. You can choose how much it rolls off your deep bass, varying amounts, a little bit more, but that's all it is. It's a high pass filter. That's what it is.
So even calling it low frequency containment is just marketing.
It just makes your
speak.
bass
It's a high-pass
quieter.
filter.
That's what it does.
It just cuts it off at 20, 40 hertz.
It's not a
whatever
brick
it's set to,
wall,
right?
but it just rolls off your bass.
I got you. Okay, that's dumb. I mean, I guess if you're trying, if you have neighbors to bother, and I have a lot of feelings about it because back in the day, apartments I used to live in, it was a big deal. For my own system and for other people bothering me, just don't get subwoofers that play below 30 hertz. Save money.
Think I've seen other brands with something similar, but subwoofers themselves, like SVS's, have a room size compensation filter. Same thing. It's a low end roll off. That's what the room size compensation filter is.
Gotcha. Dynamic compression seems pretty straightforward as a setting. He doesn't want that, but there is also loudness management. What is that? What is loudness management versus dynamic compression?
Loudness management only applies to Dolby signals. In fact, no, I've seen it on my cable box. So yeah, loudness management is a piece of metadata in Dolby signals only, where they can, it's supposed to be this whole, like, it's part of the dialogue normalization thing, is the loudness management feature. So it should be on as long as the metadata has been written correctly. It's what it's supposed to do is keep dialogue at the intended level across whatever it is. So whether you switch from a commercial to the program, it's supposed to keep dialogue at the intended level. But yeah, it's only applying to Dolby signals, and it should be on.
Okay. All right. And I think we actually got through Infinite. Well, how about that? That looked like that was going to take forever, but it did not.
We went way over time,
Did we get through the questions?
We got through the questions. That is the end of our topic list for this week by going 20 minutes over time.
Let us know if you're in the 2+ hour club. It's the coolest club to be in. We got a little tree house. It's fun.
Some people do, I'm sure of it.
I hope so.
Yeah, so yeah, nobody left on the list for next week, although some questions did come in on Monday and Tuesday, so we'll be answering those next week. Don't know if Tom will be back, but hopefully. And yeah, we will scroll back up here, thank our listeners of the week. Once again, if you'd like to do a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by coming to our website, avrant.com, and clicking on Support AVRant. We have 119 patrons, including Clarence K, over at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. So thank you very much.
Don't you want to be 120, dear listener?
Wouldn't that be nice? Bump us back over that
There's
threshold.
no upper limit. You can put all the zeros at the end of that.
And also want to thank Ken S., who talked us up to Parts Express when he bought some speaker wire over there. So yeah, that's it. If you want to send in your question, please email us, question@avrant.com. That's the place to send it. And if you want to get in touch with Lee, where can they find you, Mr. Lee Overstreet?
Just hit me up on Twitter if you can, @LeeOvertweet. I do enjoy it because it's fun to have people on there who want to and enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. Because, normally social media, especially lately, can grate on your nerves because of the topics, It's kind of unavoidable. So, it's been kind of fun adding a few people here and there from this podcast that want to talk about electronics and related topics. It's so nice.
For sure. Well, for AVRant and on behalf of Tom Andry, I am Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.